You're fired. 2 words. That's all it took to shatter Eliza Rowan's carefully constructed world. She stood in the Duke's marble study, her fists clenched so tight her nails drew blood, watching 6 weeks of work, 6 weeks of hope, collapse like a house of cards. 7 brides. 7 rejections. And now, one impossible choice. Recommend the woman who'd threatened to destroy her or watch her father's business crumble to dust. But here's the thing about being underestimated your whole life. You learn to see what others miss. Stay until the end to discover how one woman's refusal to break changed everything. Drop a like and tell us what city you're watching from. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Eliza Rowan knew it was important before she even broke the seal. The weight of the paper, the deep crimson wax stamped with a crest she recognized from every society column in the city. The Vane family crest, a hawk clutching a key. Her hands didn't shake as she unfolded it. They couldn't afford to. Miss Rowan, your reputation for discernment precedes you. I require your services in a matter of utmost importance. Present yourself at Vane Manor tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Come alone. A. Vane. Eliza read it 3 times, each time feeling the same cold thrill run down her spine. Alaric Vane, the Duke of Ashford, the most powerful unmarried man in the kingdom and possibly the most dangerous. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her desk drawer beneath the stack of unpaid invoices that had been growing for months. Eliza? Her father's voice drifted from the study down the hall, weak and papery. Was that the post? Nothing important, Papa, she called back, injecting false brightness into her voice. Just a confirmation for the winter's dinner party. She hated lying to him, but she hated the truth more, that Marcus Rowan, once the most respected textile merchant in 3 counties, now spent his days in a laudanum haze, pretending not to notice how the business he'd built over 30 years was bleeding money from a dozen different wounds. Bad investments. Worse partners. And one catastrophic warehouse fire that insurance had mysteriously refused to cover. Eliza had tried everything. She'd negotiated with creditors, charmed potential investors, even considered selling their house. The last thing her mother had left them before the fever took her. Nothing worked. The wolves were at the door and they were getting hungry. But this letter, this could change everything. The next afternoon, Eliza stood before the wrought iron gates of Vane Manor, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from her best dress, a deep forest green that had been fashionable 2 seasons ago, but still held its elegance. Her reflection in the polished gate showed a woman of 26 with sharp hazel eyes, dark hair pinned in a simple chignon, and a spine that refused to bend despite every reason it should. She'd built her reputation on reading people, on understanding what they wanted before they knew themselves. Society matrons hired her to navigate their daughters through the treacherous waters of courtship. Ambitious men sought her counsel on which alliances would elevate their standing. She'd become the invisible architect of a dozen successful marriages, her name whispered in parlors but never spoken aloud in polite company. A woman in her position couldn't afford scandal, couldn't afford mistakes, couldn't afford to fail. The gates swung open. Vane Manor loomed before her, all gray stone and Gothic arches, windows like watchful eyes. A butler materialized as if summoned by thought itself, his face professionally blank. "Miss Rowan, His Grace is expecting you." She followed him through halls lined with portraits of stern-faced Vanes, each one seeming to judge her as she passed. The manor smelled of old money and older secrets, beeswax, leather, and something else she couldn't quite name. Power, maybe, or isolation. The study doors opened. Alaric Vane stood with his back to her, silhouetted against floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked manicured gardens stretching toward distant woods. He was tall. She'd known that from seeing him at society functions. But here, in his own domain, he seemed to occupy more space than physics should allow. "Miss Rowan." He didn't turn around. "Thank you for coming." "Your Grace." She kept her voice level, professional. "Your letter suggested urgency." "Did it?" Now he turned, and she got her first clear look at the man whose marriage, or lack thereof, had been the subject of speculation for 5 years. He was 32, dark-haired, with features that would have been handsome if they weren't so severe. Aristocratic nose, strong jaw, eyes the color of winter storms. Everything about him was sharp edges and controlled power, from his perfectly tailored coat to the way he moved. Economical, purposeful, revealing nothing. "I need a wife," he said, as casually as someone might order tea. Eliza had expected this, had prepared for it. "I see. And you require assistance in selecting an appropriate match." "Not selecting." He moved to his desk, pulled out a leather folder. "Finding. I want you to present me with candidates, women of suitable breeding, intelligence, and character. I'll make the final decision naturally." Naturally, she accepted the folder he handed her. "How many candidates do you require?" 7 should suffice. "And your timeline?" 6 weeks. Her mind was already calculating. 6 weeks to vet, approach, and present 7 women of sufficient quality to interest a duke. Challenging, but possible. "My fee will be substantial." He named a figure that made her throat tighten, enough to pay off every debt, with plenty left over, enough to save her father's business, to rebuild, to breathe again. Too substantial. "That's generous, Your Grace?" "I don't believe in being generous, Miss Rowan. I believe in fair compensation for fair work." He returned to his position by the window. "You have a reputation for understanding people, for seeing past the masks they wear. That's rare and valuable." She should have felt flattered. Instead, something cold slithered down her spine. "What exactly are you looking for in a wife, Your Grace?" For the first time, something like emotion crossed his face. Amusement, maybe, or calculation. "That's what I'm paying you to discover. I work better with parameters." "Then here are your parameters. She must be from a respectable family. She must be intelligent enough to hold a conversation. She must be willing to accept the responsibilities that come with being a duchess." He paused. "And she must be someone I won't grow bored of in a week." Eliza studied him, this man who spoke of marriage like a business transaction. Most of her clients approached matrimony with either desperate pragmatism or starry-eyed romance. Alaric Vane offered neither. He was assessing her as thoroughly as she was assessing him, and she had the distinct impression he saw far more than she was comfortable revealing. "I'll need access to society events," she said. "Introductions. Your cooperation in meeting the candidates. You'll have whatever you need. And discretion. If word spreads that the Duke of Ashford is actively seeking a bride through an intermediary—" "I trust your professionalism, Miss Rowan." His eyes locked on hers. "Just as you'll trust mine. We both have reputations to protect." There it was. The acknowledgement of the precarious position she occupied, respectable enough to advise, not respectable enough to be seen as equal. One wrong move, one whispered rumor, and she'd lose everything. Her clients, her credibility, her only means of survival. "Then we have an understanding," she said. "We do." He pulled a contract from his desk drawer already prepared. "Half now, half upon successful completion. You'll report to me weekly on your progress." She scanned the contract. It was thorough, ironclad, and weighted heavily in his favor. But the money was real. She signed. "One more thing," Alaric said as she rose to leave. "I appreciate honesty, Miss Rowan. Don't tell me what you think I want to hear. Tell me the truth, even if, especially if, it's uncomfortable." "The truth is rarely comfortable, Your Grace. Precisely why most people avoid it." She left Vane Manor with a banker's draft in her reticule and a knot of unease in her stomach. Something about this arrangement felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but like stepping onto ice that looked solid but might crack at any moment. Still, she couldn't afford doubt. Not now. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of carefully orchestrated encounters. Candidate 1 was Lady Marguerite Ashton, a blonde beauty with impeccable bloodlines and a dowry that could fund a small army. Eliza arranged for them to meet at the Havisham Ball, ensuring Marguerite was positioned near the East Terrace at precisely 9 o'clock, when Alaric would be taking his habitual escape from the ballroom. She watched from across the room as they spoke. Marguerite was perfection itself, gracious, charming, saying all the right things. Alaric's expression remained unreadable. The rejection came the next morning, too agreeable. Candidate 2 was Miss Caroline Winters, celebrated for her sharp wit and classical education. She could discuss philosophy in 3 languages and had opinions on everything from parliamentary reform to agricultural innovation. Too performative, Alaric wrote in his terse note of dismissal. Candidate 3, too ambitious. Candidate 4, too safe. Candidate 5, too eager to please. By candidate 6, the lovely and accomplished Miss Helena Pritchard, Eliza was starting to see a pattern, and she didn't like it. She requested a meeting. "You're rejecting them too quickly," she said, standing in his study again, frustration finally bleeding through her professional mask. "Lady Marguerite was everything you claimed to want. Miss Winters is brilliant. Miss Pritchard has been preparing her whole life to be a duchess." "Precisely the problem," Alaric interrupted. He was reading correspondence, barely looking at her. "They're performing duchess. I need someone who'll be honest." "Honest? Your Grace, these women barely know you. You expect them to—" "I expect them to have enough spine to disagree with me, to challenge an assumption, to show me something real instead of a carefully rehearsed audition." He set down his papers, finally meeting her eyes. "You understand what I'm saying, don't you?" She did. That was the problem. "You're looking for something that doesn't exist," she said quietly. "Women of that class are raised to be agreeable, to smooth conflict, not create it. You're asking them to contradict their entire upbringing. Then find me someone with a different upbringing." "In 6 weeks, Your Grace, You have one candidate left, Miss Rowan. Make it count." She left his study furious. Furious at him for his impossible standards. Furious at herself for taking this commission. Furious at a world that forced women to choose between authenticity and security, then punished them either way. But beneath the fury was something else. Curiosity. Because she'd started to notice things. Small things that didn't fit the image of the cold, imperious Duke, like the way he'd paused mid-conversation to help a young maid who'd dropped a tray, speaking to her with the same courtesy he'd show a countess, like the anonymous donations to the Workers' Education Society that she'd uncovered while researching his background, substantial donations made regularly with no fanfare. Like the book on his desk last week, On Liberty by John Stuart Mill, marked with dozens of annotations in his precise handwriting. Alaric Vane wasn't just wealthy and powerful. He was someone who thought deeply about that power, someone who questioned it, someone, she realized with the start, not unlike herself. She'd been keeping her own secret for 2 years now. Every week, under the pseudonym Veritas, she published essays in the Independent Observer, sharp, scathing analyses of society's hypocrisies. The marriage market that treated women like commodities, the laws that gave husbands ownership of their wives' property, the way power protected power while crushing everyone beneath it. It was dangerous work. If anyone connected Veritas to Eliza Rowan, her reputation would be destroyed. But she couldn't stop. Because someone had to say the things polite society refused to acknowledge. Someone had to tell the truth. As she walked home through the gaslit streets, she made a decision. She would find Alaric his 7th candidate, the perfect one, a woman who could be exactly what he claimed to want, and then she would wash her hands of this entire mess. The 7th candidate found her. Eliza was reviewing notes in her study when her housekeeper appeared, looking flustered. "Miss Rowan, there's a Lady Vivian Blackwood here to see you. She says it's urgent." Vivian Blackwood. The name was familiar. New to society this season, daughter of a northern earl with mining interests. Beautiful in a sharp-edged way, with red hair and ambitions that showed. She swept into Eliza's study like she owned it. "Miss Rowan, we should talk." "Lady Vivian, I don't recall scheduling—" "You're searching for a bride for the Duke of Ashford." Vivian settled into a chair uninvited. "I want to be considered." Eliza kept her expression neutral. "I'm afraid I don't discuss my client's private affairs." "Don't insult us both with discretion. Everyone knows what you do, even if they pretend otherwise." Vivian leaned forward. "I know you're down to your last candidate. I know the Duke has rejected 6 women, and I know why." "Do you?" "He's testing them, looking for something specific, something none of those society flowers could provide." Her smile was sharp. "But I can." "What makes you think—" "Because I've done my research, Miss Rowan. On him. And on you." Vivian pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. Eliza's blood went cold. It was her latest Veritas essay, published just 3 days ago. Brilliant piece about property law. I particularly enjoyed the section about how marriage essentially makes women legal non-entities. I don't know what you're suggesting. I'm suggesting that you and I understand each other. We're both playing games in a rigged system, trying to survive with what little power we can scrape together. Vivian's eyes glittered. The difference is, I'm willing to acknowledge it. Eliza's mind raced. This was a threat. Had to be. What do you want? I want you to present me to the Duke as your final candidate. And if I refuse? Then I wonder what might happen if certain people discovered that respectable Miss Rowan and the radical writer Veritas are the same person. Vivian shrugged. Your clients might find that concerning. The room felt airless. Everything Eliza had built, every careful connection, every hard-won commission balanced on a knife's edge. How did you find out? Please, your writing is distinctive, and I pay attention. Vivian stood. I don't want to hurt you, Miss Rowan. Truly. I just want a fair chance at what you're offering everyone else. Present me to the Duke. Let him decide. After she left, Eliza sat in the growing dark, her thoughts spiraling. She could refuse, could call Vivian's bluff. But if the truth came out, when it came out, because secrets like this never stayed buried, she'd lose everything. Her father would lose everything. Or she could comply, could present Vivian as the seventh candidate, knowing she was being coerced, knowing it violated every principle she'd built her reputation on. But there was a third option, one she'd been avoiding because it terrified her. She could tell Alaric the truth, all of it, about Vivian's threat, about Veritas, about the fact that she was barely keeping her head above water financially and had been from the start. She could be honest, the way he'd asked her to be on that first day. And then he could destroy her, because that's what powerful men did when you gave them leverage. The next morning, she requested another meeting. She found Alaric in his private library, surrounded by books that ranged from economics to philosophy to poetry. He looked up as she entered, and she saw something flicker in his expression. Concern? Curiosity? Miss Rowan, you look troubled. She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times, had planned exactly what to say, how to frame it, how to maintain some shred of dignity while revealing her vulnerability. Instead, she heard herself say, I'm Veritas. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. The writer, Alaric said slowly, from the Independent Observer. Yes. The one who called the marriage system legalized bondage last month. Among other things. He set down his book. Why are you telling me this? So Eliza told him about Vivian's threat, about her father's failing business, about how she'd taken his commission out of desperation, not professional interest, and how she'd been scrambling to find him candidates who fit impossible criteria while her own world crumbled around her. She told him the truth because she had nothing left to lose. When she finished, Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Thank you. For what? Confessing that I've been lying to you from the start? For being honest now, when it costs you something. He moved to the window, his habitual position she'd noticed when he was thinking. Present Lady Vivian as the seventh candidate. Eliza stared at him. You can't be serious. I'm always serious. If she's threatening you, I want to meet her, see what kind of woman uses blackmail to secure a marriage proposal. And Miss Rowan? He turned back to her, and his expression held something she'd never seen before. Respect? Understanding? Your secret is safe with me. I've read Veritas. The work is important. Don't stop. She left Vane Manor in a daze, understanding nothing except that Alaric Vane was far more complicated than she'd given him credit for. The meeting with Vivian was arranged for the following evening, a private dinner at Vane Manor, just the three of them. Eliza watched as Vivian deployed every weapon in her considerable arsenal: wit, charm, intelligence, beauty. She challenged Alaric's opinions on land reform, debated him on education policy, matched him point for point on every topic he raised. She was perfect. Eliza felt sick, because she could see what was happening. Vivian was giving Alaric exactly what he'd claimed to want, someone who pushed back, who had their own mind, who refused to simply agree. But it was still performance, still calculated, still a lie wrapped in the appearance of truth. When dinner ended, Alaric walked Vivian to her carriage, leaving Eliza alone with the ruins of the evening. She waited in the drawing room, numb. Alaric returned 20 minutes later. He poured himself a drink, then one for her. "Well," she managed, "are you going to marry her?" "No." The relief was so intense it frightened her. "Why not? She gave you everything you asked for." "She gave me what she thought I wanted. There's a difference." He handed her the glass. "She's clever, I'll grant you that, and ambitious. But she's not honest, Miss Rowan. Everything she said tonight was designed to appeal to me, just like every other candidate." "Then what do you want?" The question came out sharper than she intended, weeks of frustration finally boiling over. "I've given you aristocrats and intellectuals, reformers and beauties. I found you women who would make perfect duchesses by any reasonable standard, but you reject them all because they're not, what? Not real enough? Not broken enough? Not angry enough at the world?" "Not like you," Alaric said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. "That's not—" Eliza set down her glass, her hands shaking. "Your Grace, I'm not a candidate. I'm barely holding on to respectability as it is. My father's business is failing. I have no dowry, no connections worth mentioning, and I write essays calling people like you tyrants." "I know." "Then you know this is impossible." "Is it?" He moved closer, and she could see the storm gray of his eyes, the way he was looking at her like she was a puzzle he was finally solving. "You're the only one who's ever told me the truth, Eliza. Even when it cost you, even when it was terrifying, every other woman I've met has shown me what she thinks I want to see. But you've been fighting me from the beginning." "That's not romance, Your Grace. That's professional disagreement. It's honesty. It's seeing me as a person instead of a title. Do you know how rare that is?" "I can't be what you're looking for." But even as she said it, she felt something shifting. 6 weeks of watching him, studying him, trying to understand him. 6 weeks of seeing past the cold duke to the man who read philosophy and funded workers' education and asked impossible questions. 6 weeks of lying to herself about what she was feeling. "Why did you save my father's business?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "I found the records. The mysterious investor who bought out his debts 3 weeks ago. That was you." Alaric didn't deny it. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because your father didn't deserve to lose everything over bad luck and other people's dishonesty, and because—" He paused. "Because I knew what it would cost you if he did." "You didn't do it for the commission." "No." "Then why?" "I think you know why." And she did. Suddenly, terrifyingly, she did. But before she could respond, before she could process what was happening, the drawing room doors burst open. Vivian stood there, flanked by 2 society matrons Eliza recognized, Mrs. Pemberton and Lady Ashford, both notorious gossips. All 3 looked triumphant. "I thought you might like witnesses," Vivian said sweetly. "For what I'm about to say." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "Your Grace," Vivian addressed Alaric with perfect courtesy, "I feel it's my duty to inform you that Miss Rowan has been deceiving you. She's not merely a matchmaker. She's the radical writer veritas, the one who publishes those scandalous essays in the Independent Observer, the one calling for the destruction of everything our society holds sacred." Mrs. Pemberton gasped dramatically. Lady Ashford's eyes gleamed with malicious delight. Eliza couldn't breathe. This was it, the moment everything shattered. But Alaric's expression didn't change. "I'm aware." Silence. You knew?" Vivian's confident smile faltered. "Miss Rowan informed me herself, days ago." Alaric's voice was ice. "Unlike some, she values honesty over manipulation. But surely you can't condone—" "What I condone or don't condone is none of your concern, Lady Vivian. This conversation is over, as is your candidacy." He turned to the shocked matrons. "Ladies, I trust you can see yourselves out." They fled. Vivian stayed a moment longer, her face twisted with fury. "You'll regret this, both of you." Then she was gone too, leaving Eliza alone with Alaric and the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. "She'll tell everyone," Eliza whispered. "By tomorrow, all of society will know. My reputation will survive." Alaric took her hand. "I'll make sure of it." How? You can't control gossip. You can't stop people from Eliza. He pulled her closer, and she realized he'd used her given name. Stop thinking about what you'll lose. Start thinking about what you could gain. I don't understand. Marry me. The world tilted. That's insane, she managed. I'm the last person you should. You're the only person. Don't you see? I didn't reject those women because they were flawed. I rejected them because they weren't you. His hands framed her face, forcing her to meet his eyes. You, who argue with me, who challenge me, who see the world exactly as it is and refuse to look away, even when it hurts, who write brilliant, angry essays about injustice and then sacrifice yourself to save your father, who've been standing in this room for 6 weeks, thinking you were invisible when you were the only thing I could see. Tears burned behind her eyes. This is a terrible idea. Probably. People will say you're mad or that I trapped you somehow. Let them. I'll be the scandal of the season. We'll be the scandal of the season. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Together. And Eliza realized something that should have been obvious from the start. The 7 candidates hadn't been a test of them. They'd been a test of her. A way for Alaric to show her, week by week, rejection by rejection, exactly what he valued, what he needed, who he needed. I'm terrified, she admitted. Good. So am I. He kissed her forehead, gentle despite everything. But we can be terrified together. We can build something different, something real. Not because society demands it, but because we choose it. You're asking me to trust you. I'm asking you to trust yourself. To take what you deserve instead of accepting what you're given. His eyes held hers. You've spent your whole life shaping other people's futures, Eliza. It's time to claim your own. Outside, dawn was breaking over the gardens. A new day, a new choice. Eliza thought of her father, safe now, because Alaric had acted without being asked. Thought of the women she'd presented, each one perfect in their own way, but none of them right. Thought of 6 weeks of watching this impossible man and slowly, terrifyingly, falling in love with someone who saw past every mask she wore. Thought of the essays still waiting to be written, the truths still waiting to be told. The possibility, fragile and fierce, of a partnership built on honesty instead of performance. Yes, she whispered. Yes. And when Alaric kissed her, it felt like stepping off a cliff and discovering wings. The engagement announcement hit society like a thunderclap. By noon the next day, every drawing room in the city buzzed with speculation. By evening, the gossip had curdled into something darker. Eliza stood in her father's study, reading the society columns with growing dread, while Marcus Rowan looked on, his face gray with confusion. I don't understand, he said quietly. The Duke of Ashford? Eliza, you barely know the man. I know him well enough, Papa. She set down the newspaper, the kindest of 3 she'd read that morning. The others had been vicious. He's a good man, an honorable man. But the timing... Marcus gestured weakly at the papers. They're saying you manipulated him, that you used your position as his matchmaker to trap him somehow. Let them say what they want. Eliza, her father's voice cracked, I won't have you sacrifice yourself for me. If this is about the business, about the debts, it's not. She knelt beside his chair, taking his trembling hands. Papa, I love him. I know it sounds impossible. I know it happened too fast, but it's real. And it was. That was the terrifying part. In the cold light of morning, with scandal breaking around her like waves, she couldn't deny what she felt. Alaric had seen every ugly truth about her desperation, her secrets, her fear, and chosen her anyway. Not despite those things, but because of them. Because she was real. But the rest of society didn't care about reality. They cared about appearances, and the appearance was damning. A low-born matchmaker seducing a duke while supposedly finding him a proper bride? It was too delicious a scandal to ignore. Marcus squeezed her hands. Then I'm happy for you, my dear, truly, but I'm also afraid. So am I. The first blow came that afternoon. Eliza was reviewing her client list, trying to salvage what professional relationships she could, when her housekeeper appeared, wringing her hands. Miss Rowan, there are... There are people outside. Eliza moved to the window. A small crowd had gathered on the street below. Not large, but loud. Working class people by the look of their clothes. One woman held a sign that read, "Marriage is slavery." Another, "Eliza Rowan is a hypocrite." Her stomach dropped. "They're Veritas readers," she whispered. Of course they were. Vivian's revelation hadn't just scandalized society, it had exposed Eliza to the very people who'd believed in her anonymous words, the people she'd been writing for. And now they saw her engagement to one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in the kingdom as the ultimate betrayal. The radical writer who'd called marriage legalized bondage was marrying a duke. She couldn't even blame them for their anger. A knock at the door made her jump. Her housekeeper returned with a card. "A Miss Sarah Hendricks to see you, miss. She says it's urgent." Sarah Hendricks, editor of the Independent Observer. The woman who'd been publishing Veritas for 2 years without knowing who wrote the essays. "Show her in." Sarah was younger than Eliza had imagined, barely 30, with ink-stained fingers and sharp, intelligent eyes. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You're Veritas." "Yes." "And you're marrying the Duke of Ashford." "Yes." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? What it does to everything you've written?" "I know exactly what it looks like." Eliza kept her voice steady. "But appearances aren't always truth." "Then enlighten me, because right now it looks like you spent 2 years writing about how marriage turns women into property, then sold yourself to the highest bidder the moment you got the chance." The words stung because they echoed Eliza's own doubts. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like? Help me understand how the woman who wrote—" Sarah pulled a clipping from her bag, read aloud. "Every marriage contract is a contract of surrender, where a woman exchanges her autonomy for security, her voice for protection. How that woman can now claim to be freely choosing marriage to one of the most powerful men in society. Because I am freely choosing it." Eliza met Sarah's eyes. "Everything I wrote was true. The system is broken. The laws are unjust. Women are forced into impossible choices every day. But that doesn't mean every marriage is a prison. It means we need to fight for the right to choose differently." "And you think marrying a duke is fighting?" "I think marrying a man who sees me as an equal, who values my voice, who wants to build something better together, yes, that's fighting, in its own way." Sarah studied her for a long moment. "The readers don't see it that way. They feel betrayed. And honestly, I'm not sure I disagree with them." "Then drop Veritas. I'll understand." "That's not—" Sarah shook her head, frustrated. "I don't want to drop you. Your essays are the most powerful thing we publish. But I need to know if you still believe in what you're writing, or if this engagement means you've decided to play by society's rules after all." Before Eliza could answer, shouting erupted from the street. Both women rushed to the window. The crowd had grown, and now there were others joining them, well-dressed men and women, society types, their faces twisted with contempt. The two groups weren't mixing, but they shared a common target: Eliza Rowan. "You need to leave," Eliza told Sarah, "before this gets worse." "It's already worse." But Sarah headed for the door. She paused on the threshold. "I'll hold your column slot open. 1 more week. Write me something that explains this. Something that proves you haven't abandoned everything Veritas stood for." Then she was gone, leaving Eliza alone with the sound of angry voices rising from the street. By evening, the crowd had dispersed, but the damage was done. 3 of Eliza's remaining clients sent letters terminating her services. A 4th suggested, with poisonous politeness, that perhaps Miss Rowan had been too distracted by her own romantic prospects to properly serve others. Marcus found her in the study as sunset bled red across the sky. "You should go to him," he said gently, "to the Duke. He can protect you from this." "No." Eliza straightened her spine. "Running to him now would only confirm what everyone's saying, that I'm using him, that I need his protection because I can't stand on my own. Pride is a cold companion, my dear." "So is shame." She managed a weak smile. "I'll weather this, Papa. I've weathered worse." But she wasn't sure that was true anymore. The next morning brought a summons, not from Alaric, but from his mother. The Dowager Duchess of Ashford rarely came to the city, preferring her country estate where she could pretend the modern world didn't exist. But apparently, her son's scandalous engagement warranted an exception. Eliza presented herself at Vane Manor at the appointed hour, dressed in her most conservative gown, armor against the battle she knew was coming. The Dowager received her in the formal drawing room, a calculated insult. Family was received in the private parlor. Eliza was being reminded of her place. Catherine Vane was 70, silver-haired, and sharp as cut glass. She looked Eliza up and down with the air of someone inspecting livestock. "So, you're the matchmaker." "I was." Eliza met her gaze steadily. "Now I'm simply a woman who loves your son." "Love," Catherine said the word like it tasted bitter. "How convenient that you discovered this love while in his employ, while searching for his bride." "The timing is unfortunate, I won't deny that." "Unfortunate?" Catherine's laugh was cutting. "My dear, it's catastrophic. Do you know what the clubs are saying? What's being whispered in every respectable house? That my son, a duke, a man of unimpeachable reputation, has been seduced by a scheming social climber. I never schemed." "Didn't you?" Catherine rose, moving with the controlled grace of someone used to commanding rooms. "You insinuated yourself into his life under professional pretenses. You presented him with candidates you knew he'd reject, and when you'd isolated him sufficiently, you revealed your supposed secret identity as this radical writer, appealing to his reformist sympathies. That's not what happened. Isn't it? Because from where I stand, it looks remarkably calculated." Catherine stopped directly in front of her. "Tell me, Miss Rowan, if my son weren't a duke, if he had no title, no wealth, no influence, would you still want to marry him?" The question hung between them like a blade. "Yes," Eliza said quietly. "I would marry him if he were a clerk, if he were a laborer, if he had nothing but the clothes on his back, because I love who he is, not what he has. Words cost nothing. Then what would convince you? What proof could I possibly offer?" Catherine's smile was thin and cold. "There is no proof. That's the point. You can't prove love, Miss Rowan. You can only prove self-interest. And right now, your self-interest aligns perfectly with this engagement. So I'm condemned regardless of the truth. You're condemned by appearance, by timing, by the fact that you are fundamentally unsuitable to be a duchess." Catherine returned to her seat. "But I didn't ask you here to debate philosophy. I asked you here to make you an offer." Eliza's hands clenched. "What kind of offer?" "End this engagement, quietly. I'll ensure you're compensated generously, enough to settle your father's remaining debts and establish yourself comfortably elsewhere. Perhaps abroad, where the scandal won't follow you. You want to pay me to leave? I want to save my son from a disastrous marriage. And despite what you may think, I'm trying to save you too." Catherine's expression softened fractionally. "You seem intelligent, Miss Rowan. Surely you understand this can't work. Even if you somehow love him, even if he believes he loves you, it won't survive what's coming. The scrutiny, the whispers, the constant doubt. It will poison everything." Eliza thought of the crowd outside her house, the accusations, the clients abandoning her, Sarah's disappointed eyes. "How long do I have to decide?" she heard herself ask. 3 days. After that, I'll assume you've made your choice, and I'll take other measures to protect my family's interests." It wasn't until Eliza was back in the carriage, shaking with suppressed fury, that she realized what Catherine had done. Not just threatened her, given her a way out. A respectable exit that would solve all her problems. All she had to do was abandon the man she loved. The next 2 days passed in a blur of increasing pressure. The Morning Chronicle published a satirical cartoon showing a spider in a bonnet catching a duke in its web. The Ladies' Gazette ran an editorial questioning whether someone who wrote such inflammatory essays should be allowed anywhere near the aristocracy, let alone marry into it. Even the Independent Observer, her own platform, published a letter from readers demanding Veritas explain herself or step down. Eliza tried to write the essay Sarah had requested, tried to find words that would bridge the gap between who she'd been and who she was becoming. But every draft felt like a lie. How could she defend a choice she was barely sure of herself? On the third day, Alaric finally broke through the barriers she'd erected. He appeared at her door unannounced, brushing past the housekeeper before Eliza could refuse to see him. 3 days, he said without preamble. I've given you 3 days to face this alone because I thought that's what you needed. Was I wrong? She'd been strong for so long. Strong through her mother's death, through her father's decline, through every humiliation and setback. But looking at Alaric now, at the concern and love naked in his eyes, something in her finally cracked. Your mother offered me money to leave you. His jaw tightened. I know, she told me. You knew? She's trying to protect me. It's what she does. He moved closer. What did you tell her? I asked for time to think. And? Have you thought? Eliza laughed, but it came out broken. I've thought about nothing else. About how this engagement has destroyed my reputation. About how my own readers think I'm a hypocrite. About how even the people who support us are doing it through gritted teeth, waiting for me to fail. So you're going to take her offer? I don't know. The words burst out of her. Alaric, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be what you need, what a duchess needs to be. I don't know how to face rooms full of people who despise me and act like everything is fine. I don't know. He kissed her, hard and desperate and real. When he pulled back, his hands were framing her face. Then don't act like everything is fine. Be angry. Be scared. Be exactly who you are. That's all I've ever asked. It's not enough, not for your world. Then we'll change my world. He rested his forehead against hers. Eliza, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be brave, to stand beside me even when it's terrifying, to build something new instead of accepting what we've been given. What if I can't? What if I'm not strong enough? You're the strongest person I know. You've been fighting your whole life. The only difference now is you don't have to fight alone. There was a commotion outside. Raised voices. Eliza pulled away, moved to the window. The crowd was back, larger this time. And now there were reporters mixed in, notebooks ready, vultures circling for a story. This is what our life will be, she said quietly. Constant scrutiny, constant judgment. Yes, Alaric joined her at the window. It will be hard, probably harder than either of us can imagine. But Eliza, he turned her to face him. I've spent my entire life being what everyone expected. The proper duke, the cold, controlled nobleman. It was killing me. Then you walked into my study and reminded me what it felt like to be alive, to be seen, to be real. I'm terrified of losing you, she whispered. Then don't let go. Before she could respond, her housekeeper burst in, face white. Miss Rowan, there's a man here. He says he's from the Morning Post. He's demanding a statement about... She paused, eyes darting to Alaric. About your secret marriage last week. Eliza went cold. What? He claims to have proof. A marriage certificate. He says you and the Duke were secretly married 7 days ago before the engagement was announced. That the whole thing was a cover-up after... The housekeeper couldn't continue. After what? Alaric's voice was ice. After Miss Rowan was seen leaving Vane Manor at dawn, multiple times. The implication is that we were having an affair, Eliza finished numbly. That the engagement was forced, that I trapped you. The reporter was shown in despite their protests, a weaselly man with knowing eyes and a malicious smile. Your Grace, Miss Rowan, I'm Cyrus Fletcher from the Morning Post. I just need a few comments about the marriage certificate that was filed. There is no marriage certificate, Alaric said coldly. We're engaged, not married. Whatever document you claim to have is a forgery. I have 3 sources who saw Miss Rowan leaving your residence before sunrise, on multiple occasions. Miss Rowan was conducting business, as my employee. Very intimate business, from what I hear. Fletcher's smile widened. The public deserves to know the truth, Your Grace. Was this engagement voluntary? Or did circumstances require it? Eliza saw red. Get out, she said quietly. I'm simply asking questions. Get out! The words tore from her throat with such force that Fletcher actually stumbled backward. You don't care about truth? You care about selling papers by destroying lives. You're a parasite, and I want you out of my house before I throw you out myself." Fletcher's expression turned ugly. "You'll regret that, Miss Rowan. When tomorrow's edition runs, when everyone sees what you really are." Alaric moved between them, his voice deadly soft. "If you print one word of this fabricated scandal, I will sue your paper into bankruptcy. I will personally ensure you never work in journalism again. And I will make it my life's mission to expose every lie, every paid source, every piece of fiction you've ever published as fact. Do you understand me?" The two men stared at each other. Fletcher broke first. "You can't silence the truth forever, Your Grace." "That's not truth. That's slander. Learn the difference." After Fletcher left, Eliza sank into a chair, shaking. "This won't stop. Even if we threaten legal action, there will be others. More rumors, more lies. It will never end." "No," Alaric agreed. "It won't. Not if we keep reacting. Not if we keep defending ourselves against every accusation." "Then what do we do?" He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. An essay, written in her handwriting, the one she'd been struggling to finish. "You tell the truth. Your truth. Not as a defense, but as a declaration." She stared at the pages, at the words she'd written and crossed out and written again, trying to explain the unexplainable. "Sarah said I had 1 week to prove I still believed in what Veritas stood for." "Do you?" Eliza thought about the women she'd written for. The ones trapped in loveless marriages, bound by laws that gave them no power, no voice, no choice. She'd written for them because she understood their cages, even if she'd never been fully locked inside one. But she'd also written that the system had to change, that women deserved the right to choose their own futures. And now she was choosing hers. "Yes," she said, "I do. But I also believe people can work within a broken system while fighting to fix it. That you can marry for love and still advocate for those who can't. That choosing a partnership doesn't mean accepting everything marriage represents." "Then write that." "They won't accept it. The readers who believed in me. Some won't," Alaric said. "Some will call you a hypocrite and turn away. But others? Others will see possibility. Will see that change doesn't just come from tearing down institutions, but from transforming them from the inside." She looked at him, this man who'd somehow become her anchor in a storm she'd never expected. "You really believe that?" "I believe in you. In us. In what we could build together." He knelt beside her chair. "Eliza, I'm asking you to do something terrifying. To stand up in front of everyone who's judging you and say, 'This is who I am. This is what I choose.' I'm not asking permission. I'm not seeking approval. I'm claiming my own life. And if I fail, if the backlash destroys everything, then we fail together. But Eliza," his hands covered hers, "what if we succeed?" That night, working by candlelight with Alaric reading over her shoulder, Eliza finished the essay. She wrote about hypocrisy and authenticity, about the difference between surrendering to a system and choosing to engage with it, about how loving someone didn't erase the structural problems of marriage, but refusing to love out of ideological purity didn't solve them either. She wrote about choice, real choice, the kind that came with consequences and uncertainty, and the terrifying freedom of not knowing how things would end. And she wrote about Alaric, not as the Duke of Ashford, but as a man who saw her completely and loved her anyway, who wanted to build something better together instead of accepting what they'd inherited. It was the most honest thing she'd ever written. "They'll crucify you for this," Alaric said quietly when she finished. "I know. Some readers will never forgive you. I know that too. And you're publishing it anyway. I'm publishing it because I have to, because hiding is the same as lying, and I'm done lying." She sealed the envelope addressed to Sarah. "Whatever happens after this, that's tomorrow's problem." The essay ran 2 days later. The reaction was immediate and divided. Half the Independent Observer's readership canceled their subscriptions. The other half wrote letters of support. Society matrons who'd never read Veritas suddenly began quoting her, holding her up as an example of a woman who'd seen reason and accepted her proper place. Both responses made Eliza's stomach turn. But buried in the flood of reactions was a smaller, quieter response. Letters from women who said they'd felt alone in their struggles, caught between love and principle, between heart and ideology. Women who said Eliza's honesty had given them permission to be complicated, to embrace contradictions, to choose their own paths, even when those paths didn't look like anyone else's. Those letters kept her going when everything else felt like it was crumbling. 3 days after the essay published, Catherine Vane returned. This time she came to Eliza's house. No summons to the manor, no power play. Just an aging duchess standing in a modest drawing room looking suddenly very tired. "I read your essay," Catherine said. "And?" "And I still think this marriage is a terrible idea." She paused. "But I also think my son is a grown man who's capable of making his own choices, even spectacularly foolish ones." "I'm not sure if that's acceptance or insult." "It's both." Catherine moved to the window, looking out at the street where another small crowd had gathered, supporters this time holding signs that read, "We believe in Veritas and love is a choice." "You've caused quite a stir." "Not intentionally." "The best disruptions never are." Catherine turned back to her. "I came to tell you that I'm withdrawing my objection to this engagement, not because I approve, but because fighting you will only drive Alaric further away, and I'm not willing to lose my son over this." Eliza felt something loosen in her chest. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. I'm also here to give you warning." Catherine's expression hardened. "There are people in our world who won't be as easily swayed, people who see you as a threat to everything they hold dear. They will come after you, Miss Rowan, after your reputation, your family, everything you care about, and they will be far more vicious than a few newspaper articles." "I can handle—" "No, you can't. Not alone." Catherine's voice softened slightly. "But with my son beside you, with our family's resources behind you, you might survive." It wasn't acceptance, but it was something, a grudging acknowledgement that Eliza had earned her place, even if Catherine wished she hadn't. After the dowager left, Eliza stood in the gathering dusk, watching the supporters outside. Young women, mostly. Working class and middle class people who'd found something in her words worth fighting for. She thought about what Catherine had said, about the battles ahead, about enemies she didn't even know she'd made, and she thought about Alaric, who'd stood beside her through everything, never wavering, never asking her to be less than she was. The decision crystallized. She sat down and wrote a second letter to Sarah. Not an essay this time, a proposal. When Alaric arrived that evening, he'd taken to visiting every day now, society's opinion be damned. She handed him the letter. He read it twice, then looked at her with something between admiration and concern. "You want to expand Veritas. Make it a regular column, not anonymous anymore, but under your own name." "Yes." "You want to write about marriage law reform, property rights, women's education." "Yes." "And you want to do it as the Duchess of Ashford." She met his eyes. "I want to do it as myself. The title is just context." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he started laughing, real laughter, the kind that transformed his entire face. "What?" Eliza demanded. "I was trying to find you a wife who wouldn't bore me in a week. Instead, I found someone who's going to turn society upside down and probably get us both exiled." "Is that a yes?" He pulled her close. "That's a hell yes, on one condition." "What?" "We move up the wedding. I'm not giving anyone more time to talk you out of this." She kissed him then, there in her modest drawing room with supporters chanting outside and enemies plotting in the shadows and the future stretching ahead like an unmapped country. It was terrifying. It was perfect. 2 weeks. That's all she had before becoming the Duchess of Ashford and stepping fully into the firestorm. But as Eliza stood in Alaric's arms, feeling his heartbeat steady against hers, she realized something crucial. She wasn't afraid of the battle anymore. She was ready for it. The wedding invitations went out the next morning, elegant cards edged in silver that announced the marriage would take place in exactly 12 days. Not the months-long affair tradition demanded, not the grand society spectacle everyone expected. Just a simple ceremony at the manor's private chapel, witnessed by family and a handful of carefully selected guests. The city exploded. Eliza was reading the morning papers when her father shuffled in, looking more alert than he had in months. The laudanum bottle on his desk had been gathering dust. Between Alaric's intervention and the sheer drama unfolding around them, Marcus Rowan had found something to live for again. "They're calling it the scandal of the decade," he said, settling into his chair with something almost like his old energy. "Some are saying you've bewitched him. Others claim he's gone mad. And what do you say, Papa?" Marcus studied her for a long moment, his eyes, once so vague and distant, now sharp with fatherly concern. "I say you look happier than I've seen you since your mother died, even with all this chaos, especially with all this chaos." Eliza set down the paper. She'd stopped reading the worst ones days ago. "Does that frighten you?" "Terrify me, more like. But your mother always said you were meant for something extraordinary. I just thought it would be quieter." He smiled faintly. "Shows what I know." A knock interrupted them. The housekeeper appeared, wringing her hands in a gesture that had become depressingly familiar. "Miss Rowan, there's a delegation outside. They're asking to speak with you." Eliza moved to the window. A group of women stood on the street, perhaps 20 of them, dressed in the simple but respectable clothes of shop workers and clerks. No signs this time. No chanting, just quiet determination. "Let them in," she said. "All of them." Her father's study wasn't built for crowds, but somehow they all fit. They arranged themselves along the walls, in doorways, wherever space allowed. Young and old, their faces marked by hard work and harder lives. Eliza recognized the look in their eyes. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough. The woman who'd held the Veritas is a hypocrite sign days earlier stepped forward. She was perhaps 40, with work-roughened hands and a face that had seen too many disappointments. "Miss Rowan, I'm Margaret Chen. I work at the Riverside Textile Mill. We wanted to apologize." Eliza blinked. "Apologize? We were wrong. About you. About what your engagement meant." Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "We read your essay. About choice. About how fighting the system doesn't mean you can't also live your life. And we realized we've been so angry for so long that we forgot what we were fighting for." "The right to choose," another woman called out. "That's what you wrote. That's what we all want." "But when you chose something different from what we expected," Margaret continued, "we turned on you. Just like society turns on us when we don't fit their boxes. We became the thing we hate." Eliza's throat tightened. "You had every right to be angry. I was angry too. At the world, at the unfairness, at the impossible choices women face every day. But you chose to stop being angry and start building something different. This from a younger woman, barely 20. That takes more courage than I gave you credit for." "So we came to tell you," Margaret said, "that we're with you, whatever comes next. We know people are saying terrible things. We know there are those who want to see you fail. But you have allies, Miss Rowan, more than you might think." After they left, each one shaking her hand, their grip firm and warm, Eliza stood in the empty study feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not just hope, but solidarity. She'd been so focused on surviving the scandal, on defending herself to critics and doubters, that she'd forgotten she wasn't alone. The feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. The attack came from a direction she never anticipated. Eliza was at Vane Manor reviewing wedding arrangements with the staff when Alaric's secretary burst in, face white. "Your Grace, there's been an incident at the Workers' Education Society." Alaric was on his feet instantly. "What kind of incident?" "A fire started in the library. They're saying it was deliberately set." The color drained from Alaric's face. The Workers' Education Society was his project, the thing he'd been funding in secret for 3 years, providing education and resources to people society had written off. A safe space for learning, for growth, for possibility. Casualties? His voice was deadly calm. "Minor injuries, smoke inhalation mostly, but the library is destroyed. All the books, the records, everything. I need to go there." Alaric was already moving toward the door. "Your Grace, the police are suggesting you stay away. There's a crowd gathering. They're saying—" The secretary glanced at Eliza, uncomfortable. "Saying what?" she demanded. "That this is your fault. That you've brought shame on the Duke, and this is the beginning of consequences." The carriage ride to the society felt endless. Alaric stared out the window, his jaw so tight Eliza could see the muscle jumping. She wanted to comfort him, but what could she say? That everything would be fine? That this wasn't connected to their engagement? They both knew it was. The society's building was in the industrial district, a converted warehouse that had been transformed into classrooms and meeting spaces. Now smoke poured from shattered windows while volunteers formed bucket chains, trying to salvage what they could. The crowd the secretary had mentioned was larger than expected. 50 people, maybe more, and their anger was palpable. Some held signs condemning Alaric for corrupting society's natural order. Others targeted Eliza directly, calling her a witch, a seductress, a destroyer of tradition. "Stay in the carriage," Alaric ordered. "Absolutely not." "Eliza, we face this together. Remember?" His eyes searched hers and she saw the fear there. Not for himself, but for her. "This could get dangerous." "Then it gets dangerous. I'm not hiding." They stepped down from the carriage together. The crowd's roar intensified. Alaric ignored them, moving straight to the fire captain. "How bad?" "Could have been worse, Your Grace. The sprinkler system you installed limited the spread, but the library's a total loss. Someone broke in through the back window, poured accelerant, struck a match. Witnesses? None willing to come forward." The captain's expression was grim. Whoever did this wanted to send a message. They succeeded. A man broke from the crowd, middle-aged, well-dressed, his face twisted with righteous fury. "This is what happens when the natural order is disrupted. When dukes consort with radicals and pretend working men should have the same rights as their betters." "Lord Pemberton," Alaric's voice could have frozen fire, "I'd suggest you return to whatever hole you crawled out of before I forget I'm a gentleman." "Gentleman? You're a disgrace," Pemberton gestured at Eliza. "She's poisoned your mind with her radical nonsense, made you forget your duty to your class, your position." "My duty," Alaric cut him off, "is to use my position to help people, something you've never understood. You're destroying everything our family's built." "And for what? For her?" Pemberton spat the word. "A matchmaker who writes revolutionary propaganda and seduced you while you were vulnerable." Alaric moved so fast Eliza barely saw it. One moment he was beside her, the next he had Pemberton by the collar, shoving him back against the building's wall. "Say one more word about my fiancée," Alaric said, his voice terrifyingly soft. "And I will forget I'm a gentleman permanently." "You're proving my point," Pemberton choked out. "Look at yourself, ready to brawl in the street like a common thug. She's destroyed you." A bottle shattered near their feet. The crowd surged forward, no longer just angry voices but bodies pressing close, faces contorted with hate. Someone grabbed Eliza's arm, yanking hard. She stumbled, caught herself. Alaric was there, pulling her close, his body a shield. "Get back to the carriage, now." "Not without you." Another bottle. This one didn't miss. It caught Alaric on the shoulder, glass cutting through his coat. He barely flinched, but Eliza saw blood. The police finally intervened, forming a barrier between them and the mob. The ride back to the manor was silent, Eliza pressing a handkerchief to Alaric's wound while he stared at nothing. "I'm sorry," she finally said. "For what?" "For this. For the fire, the mob, for putting you in danger." "Stop." He caught her hand. "This isn't your fault. These people, Pemberton and his ilk, they've always hated what the society represents. You're just a convenient excuse." "But they're not wrong about the timing. If I hadn't, then nothing would change. Ever." He turned to face her fully. "Eliza, people like Pemberton want the world to stay exactly as it is because it benefits them. They'll attack anything that threatens their power. If it wasn't you, it would be someone else, something else. But the society will rebuild, better than before, with more security, more resources, more visibility." His grip on her hand tightened. "I'm not backing down. From the society, from you, from any of it." When they reached the manor, Catherine was waiting in the entrance hall. She took one look at her son's torn, bloody coat and went pale. "What happened?" "A reminder," Alaric said, brushing past her toward his study, "of what we're up against." Eliza moved to follow, but Catherine caught her arm. "A word, Miss Rowan." In the private parlor, the family room, Eliza noted with surprise, Catherine poured 2 glasses of brandy with shaking hands. "This is my fault," the dowager said. "What?" "Lord Pemberton. His wife is my oldest friend. I may have expressed certain concerns about your engagement, about what it represented, what it might lead to." Catherine handed Eliza a glass. I never imagined he'd take it this far." "You told them to attack the society?" "Of course not. But I planted seeds, watered fears, made people feel justified in their outrage." Catherine's composure cracked. "I wanted to protect my son. Instead, I put him in danger." Eliza could have twisted the knife, could have blamed Catherine for everything, and part of her wanted to. But looking at this proud woman's genuine anguish, she found she couldn't. "What's done is done," she said quietly. "The question is what happens next." "Next?" Catherine laughed bitterly. "Next, more people will follow Pemberton's example. More attacks, more violence, all justified as defending tradition. And my son will keep fighting until—" She broke off. "Until what?" "Until they destroy him, or worse." Catherine met her eyes. "They won't stop with property, Miss Rowan. Men like Pemberton don't just want to humiliate Alaric. They want to break him, to make an example of what happens when nobility forgets its place." A chill ran down Eliza's spine. "You think they'd actually hurt him?" "Mom, I think they'd justify anything to protect their vision of order, and the more he fights them, the more dangerous this becomes." That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She stood at her bedroom window, watching the gaslights flicker in the darkness, and thought about what Catherine had said. The wedding was 10 days away. 10 days for their enemies to escalate, to plan, to strike again. She thought about the fire, the mob, the bottle that had drawn blood. And she thought about Alaric sleeping just down the hall in the manor. Catherine had insisted they both stay after the attack, believing they could fight this together. But what if fighting wasn't enough? What if love wasn't enough? The answer came to her slowly, painfully, like a blade sliding between ribs. She could stop this, not by backing down, not by leaving, that would solve nothing, but by going on the offensive, by forcing their enemies into the light where everyone could see them. It would be dangerous, possibly catastrophic. But waiting for the next attack, the next fire, the next mob, that was its own kind of death. She dressed quickly and went to find Alaric. He was in his study, surrounded by papers, building plans for the society, insurance documents, letters of support from workers. He looked up as she entered, and she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "I have an idea. You're going to hate it." That got his attention. "I'm listening." Eliza took a breath. "We move the wedding, make it public. Not hidden away in a private chapel, but out in the open where everyone can see." "Eliza. And we invite everyone, not just the select few on our list, but the workers from the society, the women who came to support me. Anyone who wants to witness it." She moved closer. "We turn this wedding into a statement, a line in the sand. That's suicide. After today, after the mob, after today, we know our enemies will keep attacking no matter what we do. So we force them to do it publicly. Make them show their true faces in front of witnesses they can't intimidate or silence." Alaric stood, shaking his head. "You're talking about painting a target on us, on purpose." "I'm talking about taking control of the narrative. Right now, they get to attack from the shadows, make us look weak, make us look scared. But if we stand up in front of everyone and declare what we are, what we believe, they'll have to come at us openly. And when they do, people will see them for what they really are. People could get hurt. You could get hurt. People are already getting hurt. The society burns while we hide. How long before they come after something else? Someone else?" She grabbed his arms. "Alaric, I know you want to protect me. But I didn't fall in love with a man who plays it safe. I fell in love with someone who fights for what's right, even when it's terrifying." He searched her face. "You're absolutely certain about this?" "No, I'm terrified. But I'm also sure that hiding won't save us. It'll just prolong the inevitable." For a long moment, he was silent. Then, "We'd need security, lots of it, and we'd need to warn everyone attending what they might be walking into." "So we warn them. We tell the truth, And we let them choose. The whole city will be watching. Good. Let them watch. Alaric pulled her close, and she felt him trembling. Not with fear, she realized, with something fiercer, determination. You're the bravest person I've ever met, he whispered against her hair, or the most foolish. Sometimes they're the same thing. The new invitations went out the next morning. The response was immediate and divided. Half the aristocracy declined in horror. A public wedding, with commoners attending? Unthinkable. But others, younger members of noble families, reformist politicians, intellectuals who'd been waiting for someone to challenge the status quo, accepted enthusiastically. And from the working districts came a flood of responses. People who'd never dreamed of attending a duke's wedding suddenly invited not as servants, but as guests. The newspapers had a field day. "Duke's defiant wedding plans shock society," screamed the Morning Post. "Vain to wed revolutionary writer in public spectacle," announced the Chronicle. But buried among the outrage were other voices, smaller papers, progressive journals, even some society columnists who saw something more than scandal. "Perhaps," wrote one, "we're witnessing the beginning of something new, not the destruction of tradition, but its evolution." Margaret Chen and her delegation returned, this time with more women and men. Workers from the society, shop owners, teachers, a cross-section of people who'd been invisible to society but saw themselves in what Eliza and Alaric were doing. "We'll be there," Margaret said simply. "All of us. Whatever comes." But 6 days before the wedding, everything changed. Eliza was at the manor reviewing security arrangements when a messenger arrived, face grave. The note he carried was addressed to Alaric, marked urgent. She found him in the library and watched his expression darken as he read. "What is it?" "Lord Pemberton has filed a formal challenge with the House of Lords. He's claiming I'm mentally unfit to hold my title, that my engagement to you, my support of the society, my radical sympathies, all evidence of deteriorating judgment." Eliza's blood went cold. "Can he do that?" "He just did. There'll be a hearing 3 days from now. The Lords will review evidence, hear testimony, and decide if I'm competent to remain Duke of Ashford. That's the day before our wedding." "I know. What happens if they rule against you?" Alaric's jaw tightened. "They strip my title, put my lands in trust until I can prove I've recovered my faculties. Essentially make me a prisoner in everything but name. And our marriage? Without my title, without my resources, Eliza, I'd have nothing to offer you." "I don't care about your title." But they do. Don't you see? This is the perfect move. They don't have to stop the wedding. They just have to take away everything that makes it a threat." He slammed the paper down. "If I'm not the Duke, I'm just a disgraced nobleman marrying his former employee. No scandal, no statement, no power to change anything. Then we fight it. We show them you're not unfit. With what evidence? Everything they'll point to is true. I did hire you under unusual circumstances. I did reject 7 perfectly suitable candidates. I did fund a radical education program. I am planning to marry someone society considers beneath me." He laughed bitterly. "By their standards, I am mad." Eliza's mind raced. 3 days. 3 days to prepare a defense, to gather evidence, to somehow prove that choosing love and justice over tradition wasn't insanity. 3 days to save everything they'd fought for. "Who will testify?" she asked. "Pemberton, obviously. Lady Vivian Blackwood. She's been talking to anyone who'll listen about how I rejected her for no reason. Others who feel threatened by what we represent. And who will speak for you? My mother, though her credibility is shaky after she initially opposed the engagement. A few reformist politicians? Not enough." He met her eyes. "Not nearly enough." "Then we need more. We need people who can show the Lords that what you're doing isn't madness. It's evolution, progress. The Lords don't care about progress. They care about maintaining power. Some of them do. But others, the younger ones, the ones who see how the world is changing, they might be persuaded." She grabbed his hands. "Alaric, we have 3 days. Let's use them." What followed was a blur of desperate activity. They gathered testimony from the workers at the society, letters describing how Alaric's support had changed their lives, given them opportunities they'd never dreamed possible. They recruited Sarah from the Independent Observer to compile evidence of Alaric's anonymous charitable work over the years, proving this wasn't sudden madness but consistent principle. They even convinced some of the women Eliza had presented as candidates to speak on his behalf, explaining that his rejections weren't capricious, but based on genuine incompatibility. But Eliza knew it wouldn't be enough. The lords had already made up their minds. This hearing was just theater, a way to give legitimacy to a predetermined verdict. She needed something bigger, something that would force them to see Alaric not as a threat, but as someone they couldn't afford to lose. The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days before the hearing, Marcus Rowan appeared at the manor. He looked healthier than Eliza had seen him in years, alert and focused, carrying a leather portfolio. "Papa, what are you doing here?" "Saving your future, hopefully." He spread papers across Alaric's desk. "These are investment records, shipping manifests, trade agreements. I've been reviewing them since the Duke paid off my debts, trying to understand how he did it without using his own funds." Alaric went very still. "Marcus, you created a workers' cooperative, didn't you? Pooled their savings, provided low-interest loans, helped them invest in legitimate business ventures, then used the profits to fund the society and help people like me." Marcus looked up. "This isn't charity, Your Grace. This is revolutionary economic restructuring. I don't know what you're Don't lie to me, son. I've been in business 40 years. I know laundered money when I see it, and I know legitimate enterprise. What you've built is legitimate, radical, yes. Unprecedented, absolutely. But legitimate." He tapped the papers. "And if the lords strip your title, this entire network collapses. Hundreds of working families lose their investments. Dozens of businesses fail. The economic consequences would be catastrophic." Eliza stared at her father. "You're saying Alaric has made himself too important to remove?" "I'm saying he's done what no other nobleman has managed, made the working class economically dependent on him in a way that benefits everyone. The lords can call him mad all they want, but destroying him means destroying a significant portion of the city's economy." Alaric sat down slowly. "How did you figure this out?" "I told you, I've been in business 40 years, and I've spent the last few weeks being very bored and very motivated." Marcus smiled. "Also, your bookkeeping is excellent, but not quite as subtle as you think." The hearing took place in the House of Lords' private chamber, a room designed to intimidate with its soaring ceilings and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Lord Pemberton presented his case with theatrical flair. He called witnesses who described Alaric's erratic behavior. Lady Vivienne testified about his cruel and arbitrary rejection of suitable candidates. A society matron described how he'd been corrupted by radical influences. Through it all, Alaric sat motionless, his face an unreadable mask. When it was his turn to respond, he stood slowly. "My lords, you've heard testimony describing my actions as evidence of madness. I won't insult your intelligence by denying those actions took place. I did hire Miss Rowan under unusual circumstances. I did reject 7 women of impeccable breeding. I do fund a workers' education program. And yes, I plan to marry someone society considers inappropriate." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. "But I'd ask you to consider what these actions actually represent. Not madness, but choice. The choice to value character over status, to invest in human potential regardless of birth, to build a future based on merit rather than accident of lineage." "Radical nonsense!" Pemberton shouted. "Perhaps, but radical doesn't mean wrong." Alaric's voice remained calm. "You have the power to strip my title, to declare me unfit. But before you do, consider this. What you're really asking is whether choosing love, justice, and progress over tradition and convenience constitutes insanity. And if the answer is yes, if those choices truly disqualify me from holding power, then I'd argue the madness isn't mine. It's the system that would punish them." The silence was absolute. Then Marcus Rowan stood in the gallery. "My lords, if I may." The Chief Justice frowned. "This is highly irregular. So is attempting to destroy a man for helping people." Marcus descended to the chamber floor, portfolio in hand. "I have evidence here of the Duke's economic activities over the past 3 years. Evidence that shows his so-called radical programs have created jobs, stimulated trade, and generated significant wealth for this city. Stripping his title doesn't just punish him, it punishes hundreds of working families who depend on the systems he's built. He spread the documents across the evidence table. Several lords leaned forward, curious despite themselves. "You can call him mad," Marcus continued. "You can condemn his choice of bride, his support of education, his vision of a more equitable society. But you cannot deny results, and the results are clear. The Duke of Ashford has done more to improve this city's economy in 3 years than most of your lordships have managed in your entire careers." "How dare you?" Pemberton sputtered. "I dare because I have nothing to lose. My business was failing. The Duke saved it, not for profit, not for favors, but because it was right. And if you punish that kind of integrity, you're not protecting society. You're killing it." The Chief Justice called for order. The chamber erupted in argument, some lords outraged by Marcus's audacity, others clearly troubled by the economic evidence. Eliza watched from the gallery, her heart in her throat. This could go either way. The lords could dismiss the evidence, rule against Alaric, destroy everything, or they could do something unprecedented. The deliberation took 4 hours. 4 hours of waiting while Eliza paced the anteroom, while Alaric sat with his head in his hands, while their entire future hung by a thread. When they were finally recalled, the Chief Justice's face was unreadable. "We have considered the evidence, the testimony, the economic implications," he paused, "and we have reached a decision." Eliza stopped breathing. "This body finds that while the Duke of Ashford's recent choices are unconventional, they do not constitute evidence of mental incompetence. The challenge is dismissed." Relief hit her like a physical blow. Alaric's shoulders sagged. But the Chief Justice wasn't finished. However, his gaze fixed on Alaric. "This body also finds that your actions have brought unprecedented scrutiny to the nobility. You have challenged traditions that have stood for centuries. You have aligned yourself with elements that threaten the social order. And while we cannot strip your title for these choices, we can issue a warning. Proceed with caution, Your Grace. The next misstep may not be forgiven." It wasn't absolution. It was a threat wrapped in legal language. They left the chamber to find a crowd waiting outside. News had spread fast. Supporters cheered. Enemies glared in silent fury. And standing at the edge of the crowd, half hidden in shadow, was a man Eliza didn't recognize. But something about the way he watched them, cold, calculating, patient, made her blood run cold. He caught her eye, smiled, and disappeared into the crowd. "Did you see that?" she asked Alaric. "See what?" But when she looked again, the man was gone. That night, back at the manor, they should have been celebrating. They'd won. The title was secure. The wedding could proceed. Instead, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just survived the opening act. She found Alaric in his study, staring at nothing. "We did it," she said. "We won. We survived. There's a difference." He looked at her, and she saw something she'd never seen before in his eyes. Doubt. "Eliza, maybe we should postpone. After everything that's happened." "No." She crossed to him. "We postpone. We give them time to regroup, time to plan another attack. The wedding happens tomorrow as scheduled. People could get hurt. People are already hurt. The society burned. You were nearly beaten by a mob. Hiding won't make us safer. It'll just make us targets. And you think going through with a public wedding will somehow be better? I think it's our only chance to take control of this situation. To show everyone, supporters and enemies, that we won't be intimidated, that we're building something worth fighting for." Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then, "That man you saw outside the chamber, did you recognize him?" "No." "Why?" "Because I did. His name is Edmund Price. He's a hired investigator. The kind people use when they want to find leverage. Dirt." He met her eyes. "Someone hired him to look into us. Which means whoever's behind this isn't done. Not by a long shot. Then we face them together, tomorrow, in front of everyone. What if—" He stopped, started again. "What if I can't protect you?" She took his face in her hands. "Then we'll protect each other. That's what partnership means." He kissed her then, desperate and fierce. And when they pulled apart, she saw the doubt had been replaced by something stronger. Resolve. Tomorrow, they would stand before the city and declare their choice, their love, their defiance. Whatever came after, they would face it together. But as Eliza lay in bed that night, unable to sleep, she couldn't stop thinking about Edmund Price, about his cold smile, about the certainty in his eyes that said he knew something they didn't, about what secrets he might have already found, and whose name would appear on his report when he delivered his findings. Dawn broke gray and uncertain, the sky threatening rain as if even nature was holding its breath. Eliza stood at her window watching the city wake, her wedding dress hanging like a ghost behind her. Ivory silk, simple and elegant, chosen more for practicality than spectacle. A dress you could move in, run in, if necessary. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Whatever Edmund Price had discovered, whatever weapon their enemies planned to deploy, she would face it standing beside Alaric, in front of witnesses, in the light. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Catherine entered without waiting for permission, carrying a velvet box that looked older than both of them. "You're awake early," the dowager said. "Couldn't sleep." "Neither could I." Catherine set the box on the vanity. "I came to bring you something. The Vane family pearls. They've been worn by every duchess for 200 years. Eliza stared at the box, understanding the significance. This wasn't just jewelry, it was acceptance, legacy, the physical manifestation of Catherine's grudging approval. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything. Just wear them." Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she opened the box, revealing a stunning double strand that glowed like captured moonlight. "And try not to get yourself killed today. I've grown rather fond of having someone around who argues with my son as much as I do." It was as close to affection as Catherine had ever come. Eliza felt her throat tighten. "Thank you for this, for standing by us. Don't thank me yet. We still have to survive the day." Catherine's expression hardened. Edmund Price delivered his report last night to Lord Pemberton. Eliza's brief moment of warmth evaporated. "What did it say?" "I don't know, but Pemberton looked entirely too pleased with himself when I saw him at Lady Hertford's dinner. Whatever Price found, it's something Pemberton believes will destroy you." "Then why hasn't he used it already?" "Because public drama is more effective than private scandal. He's waiting for maximum impact." Catherine met her eyes. "He's going to strike today. At the wedding, when everyone is watching. Does Alaric know?" "I sent word this morning. He's doubling security. But Eliza, security can't stop words. Can't stop truth." She paused. "Whatever Price found, is there anything I should know? Anything that could be used against you?" Eliza thought about her life. The essays, the secrets, the desperate measures she'd taken to keep her father's business afloat. She'd been so careful, so meticulous about covering her tracks. But everyone had something to hide. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've tried to be honest about everything important, but I'm not naive enough to think there aren't details someone could twist into weapons." "Then prepare yourself. Because if Pemberton strikes, it will be in the moment when you're most vulnerable, most exposed." Catherine touched her shoulder briefly. "But remember, you're not alone, not anymore." After Catherine left, Eliza dressed slowly, each layer of silk and lace feeling like armor. She fastened the pearls herself, their weight familiar despite never having worn them before. In the mirror, she looked like someone else, someone who belonged in marble halls and ancient ceremonies. But underneath, she was still herself, still the woman who'd built a life from nothing, who'd fought for every scrap of respect and security. Still Eliza. The ceremony was scheduled for noon at St. Catherine's Cathedral, not the manor's private chapel as originally planned, but the largest church in the city. Alaric's decision, made when they'd committed to making this public. If they were going to take a stand, let it be where everyone could see. The cathedral could hold 1,000 people. They'd invited 1,200. The carriage ride felt endless. Her father sat beside her, dressed in his finest suit, looking more like his old self than she'd seen in years. The crisis had burned away his fog of laudanum and despair, leaving someone sharper, stronger. "You know," Marcus said, "your mother would have loved this. The scandal, the defiance, the sheer audacity of it all. She always said you were born to shake things up. I wish she were here. She is, in you, every stubborn, brilliant, terrifying bit of you. He squeezed her hand. I'm proud of you, Eliza. Whatever happens today, I want you to know that. The cathedral loomed ahead, its Gothic spires piercing the gray sky. A crowd had gathered outside, supporters, protesters, curious onlookers, all pressed against the barriers the police had erected. Signs waved, "Love conquers all, and tradition forever," and "Veritas speaks truth." The noise was deafening. As their carriage pulled up, Eliza saw Margaret Chen and her delegation standing near the entrance, dressed in their Sunday best. They waved, and Eliza waved back, feeling a surge of gratitude for these women who'd chosen to stand with her. Inside, the cathedral was packed. Every pew filled, people standing along the walls, even crowding into the balconies. Aristocrats in their finest beside workers in clean but simple clothes, reformist politicians next to conservative lords, society matrons clutching their pearls while young women gazed with open admiration, a powder keg waiting for a spark. At the altar, Alaric stood with his groomsmen, younger lords who'd supported his work at the society, men willing to defy their families' expectations. He looked devastating in his formal attire, all sharp lines and controlled power. But when he saw her, when their eyes met across the crowded cathedral, everything else fell away. His expression softened, filled with such open love that Eliza felt her eyes burn. This was worth fighting for. The processional began. Eliza walked down the aisle on her father's arm, feeling the weight of 1,000 watching eyes. Some looks were kind, others hostile, many merely curious, wondering what disaster would unfold. She kept her spine straight and her gaze forward. Let them watch. Let them judge. She knew who she was. Marcus placed her hand in Alaric's, and the simple contact felt like coming home. The bishop began the ceremony, an older man known for his progressive views, one of the few clergy willing to officiate what society considered a scandalous union. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of heaven and earth. The familiar words washed over her. Eliza barely heard them, focused entirely on Alaric's steady presence, his thumb tracing circles on her palm in a soothing rhythm. They were halfway through the vows when it happened. The cathedral doors burst open with a crash that echoed like thunder. Lord Pemberton strode in, flanked by 2 other lords and several men in official-looking robes. "I object!" Pemberton's voice rang out. "This marriage cannot proceed." Gasps erupted throughout the cathedral. The bishop faltered. Alaric's hand tightened on Eliza's, but he didn't turn around. "Lord Pemberton," the bishop said, clearly flustered. "This is highly irregular. So is allowing a fraud to marry into one of our oldest families." Pemberton marched down the aisle, brandishing papers. "I have evidence here that proves Miss Eliza Rowan is not who she claims to be, that her entire identity is built on lies and deception." The cathedral exploded into chaos, people shouting, standing, demanding to know what evidence. The police moved to intercept Pemberton, but he waved them off. "I have every right to present this. The marriage contract is built on false pretenses. She must be stopped before she completes this con." Alaric finally turned, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "What are you talking about? Your precious fiancée, your Grace, is not Marcus Rowan's daughter. She's not even Eliza Rowan." Pemberton held up the papers triumphantly. "Her real name is Eliza Chen, daughter of a Chinese merchant who died in debtor's prison 15 years ago. She was adopted by Marcus Rowan to legitimize his business partnership with her father, a partnership that violated every immigration and trade law on the books." The silence that followed was absolute. Eliza felt the world tilt. Chen. Her father's name. Her real father's name, the one she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten it herself. Chen. Like Margaret, like dozens of workers in the textile district. She's been hiding her heritage to avoid the prejudice that would have destroyed her social climbing, Pemberton continued, warming to his subject. Every introduction, every client, every carefully constructed connection, all built on concealing the fact that she's half Chinese. That her blood is tainted. "Enough!" Margaret Chen's voice rang out from her pew. She stood, magnificent in her fury. "How dare you use her heritage as a weapon? How dare you act like her father's name, my family's name, is something shameful." "Sit down," Pemberton snapped. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns all of us." Another woman stood, then another. Within seconds, dozens of working-class guests were on their feet. You want to condemn her for having Chinese blood? For being one of us? For understanding what it means to fight for every scrap of respect in a society that wants to keep us invisible? She lied about who she was, Pemberton shouted. No. Eliza's voice cut through the chaos, quiet but carrying. Everyone turned to look at her. I didn't lie. I survived. She stepped away from Alaric, facing Pemberton and the crowd beyond. Her heart was hammering, but her voice stayed steady. My birth father was David Chen. He came to this country with nothing and built a successful trading business through hard work and integrity. When he died, Marcus Rowan, his friend and partner, adopted me to protect me from exactly this kind of prejudice, to give me a chance at a life where my abilities mattered more than my ancestry. You concealed your true identity. I used the name I was legally given, the name of the man who raised me, who loved me as his own daughter. She looked at Marcus, who nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm not ashamed of David Chen. I'm not ashamed of my mother, who died bringing me into this world. But I also won't apologize for surviving in a society that would have destroyed me for being born to the wrong parents. You deceived everyone. Your clients, your connections, the Duke himself. I never deceived Alaric. She turned to face him, her voice softening. I told him every truth that mattered, about who I am, what I believe, what I've done. My heritage doesn't change those truths. Alaric's expression was unreadable. The entire cathedral held its breath, waiting to see how the Duke of Ashford would react to learning his bride wasn't fully English, wasn't purely the bloodline society demanded. Then Alaric smiled. Pemberton, he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine amusement. Did you really think this would work? Your Grace, surely you can't condone. Condone? I'm grateful. You've just revealed something about the woman I love that makes me respect her even more. He crossed to Eliza, took her hands. You survived prejudice, adapted to a hostile world, built a life despite every obstacle. You're even stronger than I realized. Pemberton sputtered. But her blood, the mixture, her blood is irrelevant. Her character is what matters. Alaric turned to address the crowd. Lord Pemberton wants you to be outraged that Eliza has Chinese heritage, that she concealed this fact. But I ask you, why should she have to announce it? Why should anyone's worth be determined by their ancestry rather than their actions? Because that's how society works, Pemberton shot back. Bloodlines matter. Purity matters. If we start allowing what? Allowing people to be judged by who they are instead of who their parents were. A new voice interrupted. One of the young lords in Alaric's wedding party stepped forward. My grandmother was Irish, dirt poor, Catholic. Everything society said was wrong. My grandfather married her anyway. Built one of the most successful banking houses in the country. Should I be ashamed of her? Should I have hidden her existence? Another voice. My mother was a merchant's daughter. No title, no connections. My father loved her anyway. My great-uncle married a Spanish woman. My aunt's husband was Jewish. One by one, people throughout the cathedral stood. Aristocrats, workers, everyone in between, each sharing their own mixed heritage, their own hidden histories, their own family's secrets. The bloodline myth was crumbling before Pemberton's eyes. This is madness, he shouted. You're destroying everything our society stands for. No, Eliza said quietly. We're building something better. A society where worth isn't determined at birth. Where people can rise or fall based on who they are, not what they're born as. The commoners are influencing you, filling your heads with radical nonsense. The commoners are showing us what we should have seen all along. Alaric's voice was steel, that the artificial barriers we've built to separate people only make us weaker, smaller, more afraid. Pemberton looked around wildly, seeing his support evaporating. The conservative lords he'd expected to back him were silent, clearly uncomfortable with how this was playing out. The crowd's mood had shifted from shock to something else. Not quite acceptance, but curiosity, possibility. This isn't over, Pemberton hissed. There are still laws, which I'll spend my life working to change, Alaric interrupted. Starting with the immigration restrictions that made Eliza's heritage something to hide instead of celebrate. The property laws that give me power over my wife's autonomy, the education barriers that keep talented people from rising, all of it. You're declaring war on the very foundations of society. I'm declaring war on injustice. There's a difference. The bishop, who'd been frozen in shock, finally found his voice. Perhaps we should continue with the ceremony, unless there are further objections. The cathedral waited. Pemberton looked around, seeing no allies, and finally stormed out, his papers crumpling in his furious grip. The doors slammed behind him with satisfying finality. "Well then," the bishop said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Where were we?" The ceremony continued. When they reached the vows, Eliza's voice was clear and strong. "I, Eliza Rowan, daughter of David Chen and Marcus Rowan, writer, matchmaker, fighter, take you, Alaric Vane, to be my husband, to challenge you, support you, argue with you, and love you, in defiance of convention, in spite of obstacles because of truth, for as long as we both shall live." Alaric's vows matched hers in intensity, and when the bishop finally pronounced them married, the cathedral erupted in applause that drowned out the few remaining dissenters. The kiss was supposed to be brief and ceremonial. Instead, Alaric pulled her close and kissed her like the world was ending, like they were the only two people who existed. When they finally broke apart, Catherine was standing at the altar steps, the first to approach. She looked at Eliza for a long moment, then did something unprecedented. She curtsied. Slightly, barely noticeable to anyone not paying attention. But Eliza saw it. The acknowledgement, the respect. "Welcome to the family, Duchess," Catherine said. "You've earned it." The reception at Vane Manor was unlike anything society had ever seen. Aristocrats mixing with workers, servants eating alongside nobles, the rigid boundaries that usually govern such events dissolved in the wake of the ceremony's drama. Margaret Chen found Eliza during the toasts. "You never told me we were related." "I didn't know until today. Chen isn't exactly uncommon, except David Chen had a daughter named Eliza who disappeared after his death. There were rumors she'd been adopted by an English merchant, but no one knew for sure." Margaret's eyes were bright with emotion. "You're my cousin. Second cousin, I think. Your father and my grandfather were brothers." Eliza felt the ground shift again. Family, real family, beyond Marcus and the life she'd constructed. "I don't know what to say. Say you'll come to dinner. Say you'll meet your family, the ones who stayed, who built lives in the textile district, who've been fighting the same battles you have." Margaret gripped her hands. "Say you won't forget where you came from, even now that you're a duchess." "Never," Eliza promised. "That's the whole point." The toast began. Marcus spoke first, his voice carrying across the packed ballroom. "My daughter has always been extraordinary, not because of her bloodline, but in spite of what society said her bloodline should limit her to. She's built herself twice over, once as a child surviving grief and prejudice, again as a woman carving space in a world determined to deny her. I couldn't be prouder." Then Alaric stood, and the room fell silent. "When I hired Eliza to find me a wife, I thought I knew what I wanted. Someone suitable. Someone safe. Someone who fit the mold society had created." He looked at her, and his expression held everything they'd been through. "Instead, I found someone who shattered every expectation, who challenged me, infuriated me, inspired me, who showed me that the only thing worth building is a life based on truth, even when truth is terrifying." He raised his glass. "To the Duchess of Ashford, the woman who refused to be diminished, who turned scandal into strength, and who will undoubtedly make my life infinitely more complicated and infinitely more worthwhile. I can't wait." The toast was echoed by hundreds of voices, some reluctant, some enthusiastic, all acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted. But the real moment came later, when the dancing had begun and Eliza found herself momentarily alone on the terrace, catching her breath. Sarah from the Independent Observer appeared beside her. "Hell of a day," Sarah said. "That's one way to put it. I have a proposition. Actually, more of a demand." Sarah pulled out a folded paper. "I want to expand Veritas. Make it a weekly feature instead of occasional essays. I want you to write about everything: marriage law, property rights, immigration policy, education, all of it, from the perspective of someone who's lived it and is now in a position to change it. Eliza took the paper, saw her own name in print. Veritas. Weekly commentary by Eliza Vane, Duchess of Ashford. People will say I'm using my new position for personal gain. People will say lots of things. Let them. Sarah's expression was fierce. You have a platform now. Real power. Use it. Write the truth no one else can write because they're either too afraid or too comfortable. And if I write things that make Alaric's political position harder, then you work it out together. That's what partnership means, right? Sarah smiled. Besides, something tells me the Duke knows exactly who he married. Eliza looked at the paper, feeling possibility and responsibility war within her. This was what she'd been fighting for, not just the right to marry who she loved, but the right to keep fighting, to use her voice, her position, her hard-won authority to change the systems that had tried to silence her. Weekly deadline? She asked. Every Friday, starting next week. You're ruthless. I learned from the best. Sarah extended her hand. Do we have a deal? Eliza shook it. We have a deal. As Sarah left, Alaric emerged from the ballroom. He'd shed his formal coat, his cravat loosened, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him in weeks. Hiding from your own reception? He asked, catching my breath. It's been a rather eventful day. Rather. He joined her at the railing, both of them looking out over the gardens where lanterns swayed in the evening breeze. Any regrets? About which part? The public ceremony? The dramatic revelation? The impromptu speech about heritage and justice? All of it. Any of it. Eliza thought about the morning's fear, the ceremony's chaos, the moment when everything could have fallen apart. Thought about Pemberton's face when his weapon turned into something else entirely. About Margaret's tears and Marcus's pride, and the cathedral full of people choosing to see possibility instead of scandal. No regrets, she said. You? Only that we can't do it again tomorrow. That was exhilarating. She laughed, and it felt like releasing weeks of tension. You're insane. Possibly, but you married me anyway. I did. She turned to face him fully. So what happens now? Now? Alaric pulled her close. Now we do exactly what we said we would. We build something new. We fight the battles worth fighting. We transform this institution from the inside while supporting those changing it from the outside. That's a tall order. Good thing we have help. He nodded toward the ballroom, where aristocrats and workers were still mingling, talking, beginning to see each other as people instead of categories. This is just the beginning, Eliza. What we started today. It's going to ripple outward, change things we can't even imagine yet. Or it could all collapse. We could fail spectacularly. We could, but we'll fail together, and honestly. He grinned, and it transformed his entire face. I think we're too stubborn to fail. From inside came the sound of music shifting, a waltz beginning. Alaric extended his hand. May I have this dance, Duchess? You may, Duke. They waltzed on the terrace under the emerging stars, visible now that the storm clouds had cleared. Inside, their guests celebrated. Outside, the city spread before them, vast, complicated, full of injustice and possibility in equal measure. Somewhere in that city, Pemberton was plotting his next move. Edmund Price was likely compiling more damaging information. Conservative lords were gathering to discuss how to contain this dangerous precedent. But looking at Alaric, feeling the strength of their partnership, the support of unexpected allies, the weight of purpose that now gave her life meaning beyond mere survival, Eliza felt ready. Not for easy victories or simple solutions, but for the long, grinding work of actual change, for using her voice, her position, her hard-won authority to move the needle just slightly toward justice. I love you, she said. Not for the first time, but with new weight. New understanding of what those words meant when said between equals, between partners choosing each other despite and because of everything. I love you too, Alaric replied. Now and always, through scandal and success, in defiance of convention and in service of something better. They danced until the song ended, then returned to their guests, to the celebration, the mingling worlds, the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped now that it had started. The woman who'd once shaped other people's destinies was finally living her own, and the duke who'd rejected 7 perfect brides had found the only one who mattered. Together, they would make the city remember this day, not as the scandal of the season, but as the moment when change became inevitable. And anyone who stood in their way would learn what Eliza had known all along. The most dangerous people are the ones who have nothing left to lose and everything left to build. The honeymoon lasted exactly 3 days before reality caught up with them. Eliza and Alaric had retreated to his country estate, a sprawling manor in the hills where they could breathe without feeling the city's watchful eyes. 3 days of quiet mornings, long walks through autumn woods, and the luxury of simply existing together without performance or politics. Then the messenger arrived. Alaric read the letter twice, his expression darkening with each pass. When he looked up, Eliza saw the careful controls slide back into place, the Duke instead of the husband. Parliament is convening an emergency session. They're proposing a bill to restrict property ownership by anyone of mixed heritage. It's a direct response to our marriage. Eliza felt ice settle in her stomach. How soon? 2 weeks. They're calling it the Heritage Preservation Act, claiming it's about maintaining social order and protecting English bloodlines from dilution. He set the letter down with deliberate care. It's about erasing people like you from positions of influence. People like us, she corrected. I'm a duchess now. That makes it their problem. Exactly, which is why they're moving fast before we can build real opposition. He moved to the window, tension radiating from every line of his body. Pemberton's behind this. He may have lost the battle at our wedding, but he's not giving up the war. Eliza joined him, placing her hand on his arm. Then neither do we. They returned to the city that evening. The manor felt different now, no longer just Alaric's home, but theirs, filled with staff who'd begun calling her Your Grace without the hesitation that marked uncertainty. Catherine had stayed to manage affairs in their absence, and she met them in the entrance hall with characteristic efficiency. You heard about the bill? We did, Alaric said. What's the current sentiment? Mixed. The conservative lords are rallying behind it, naturally, but the younger members are divided. Some see it as necessary protection of tradition, others recognize it as blatant prejudice dressed in legal language. Catherine's gaze shifted to Eliza. Your first Veritas column published yesterday. It's causing quite a stir. Eliza had written it during their brief respite, pouring everything from the wedding, the revelation, the response, the possibilities she'd seen in that cathedral into words Sarah had called incendiary brilliance. She'd titled it simply, On Heritage and Worth. Good stir or bad stir? Both. The Morning Post called it dangerous propaganda from a woman who's forgotten her place. The Independent Observer sold out 3 print runs, and I've received 24 letters from other noble families admitting their own mixed bloodlines. Catherine's expression was unreadable. You've made it impossible for them to condemn you without condemning themselves. That was the idea. Risky, but effective. Catherine handed Alaric a folder. These are the current vote counts for the Heritage Preservation Act. It's going to be close. Alaric scanned the numbers, his frown deepening. We're short. Even if every reformist votes against it, we need at least 5 more to block it. Then we find 5 more, Eliza said. It's not that simple. These men have built their entire identities on bloodline purity. Asking them to vote against that? I'm not asking them to abandon their beliefs. I'm asking them to see past their fear. She took the folder from him, studying the names. Who among these is persuadable? Who has something to lose if this bill passes? Catherine and Alaric exchanged glances. Then Catherine pointed to a name. Lord Ashworth. His daughter married a Scottish merchant last year, technically British, but the family has French roots 3 generations back. If this bill passes and the definition of mixed heritage expands, his grandchildren could be affected, Eliza finished. Who else? They worked through the night, identifying potential allies, mapping connections, building strategy. By dawn, they had a list of 8 lords who might be convinced to vote against the bill. 8 chances to stop legislation that would strip rights from thousands. The campaign began immediately. Alaric used his political connections, calling in favors and making careful arguments about legal precedent and economic consequences. Catherine leveraged her social network, hosting intimate dinners where she could plant seeds of doubt about the bill's broader implications. And Eliza wrote, every week, her Veritas column appeared, each one carefully calibrated to reach different audiences. She wrote about the arbitrary nature of bloodline purity, about the economic contributions of immigrant families, about the hypocrisy of condemning mixture while celebrating the Norman conquest that had created the current aristocracy. The responses poured in. Hate mail threatening violence, love letters from working-class readers who'd never seen their experiences reflected in mainstream publications. Worried queries from noble families suddenly afraid their own hidden histories might be exposed. Each letter was ammunition. Each response revealed the battle lines more clearly. 2 days before the vote, Margaret Chen appeared at the manor with unexpected news. We've organized a demonstration. 5,000 workers from the textile district, the docks, the factories, all marching to Parliament to oppose the bill. Eliza stared at her cousin. 5,000? More, probably. Word spread fast. People are terrified. This bill doesn't just affect you, Eliza. It affects anyone who doesn't fit their narrow definition of pure English. That's half the working class. The police will never allow it, which is why we're not asking permission. Margaret's expression was fierce. We're making them see us, making them understand that you can't legislate people out of existence just because their blood doesn't match your fantasy of racial purity. Margaret, if this turns violent, then it turns violent. We're done being invisible. She gripped Eliza's hands. You stood up in that cathedral and claimed your heritage. You gave us permission to do the same. Now we're fighting back. After Margaret left, Eliza found Alaric in his study, reviewing vote counts that had barely budged despite weeks of lobbying. We're going to lose, she said quietly. Not necessarily. We still have 2 days. Alaric. She waited until he looked at her. We've done everything we can through proper channels. We've made arguments, written letters, called in every favor, and we're still short 3 votes. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting we stop playing by their rules. They want to pass this bill in secret, behind closed doors where the public can't see, so we force them into the light. His eyes narrowed. The demonstration. Not just the demonstration. I want to testify before Parliament, publicly, on the record. They'll never allow it. They will if we make it a spectacle they can't ignore. If 5,000 people are marching outside while I'm demanding to be heard inside, what choice do they have? Alaric was quiet for a long moment. Then, they'll tear you apart. You know that. Pemberton and his allies will use it as an opportunity to humiliate you, to discredit everything you've said. Let them try. She moved to his desk, placed her palms flat on the polished wood. I've spent my whole life making myself small enough to survive, playing by rules designed to keep me powerless. I'm done with that. If I'm going to be a duchess, if I'm going to have this platform, I'm using it. Even if it destroys you? Even if it transforms me into something they can't ignore? She met his eyes. I need you to trust me. I do trust you. I'm just afraid. So am I. But we don't get to choose safe anymore. We chose this fight. Now we see it through. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. You're the bravest person I've ever known, and you're going to give me a heart attack before we're 30. Good thing you married someone who knows how to keep you alive. The day of the vote dawned cold and bright. By 9 in the morning, the streets around Parliament were packed with demonstrators. Not just workers, but shopkeepers, clerks, teachers. A cross-section of people whose lives would be devastated if the Heritage Preservation Act passed. They carried signs. We are English too, and blood doesn't define worth, and Duchess Eliza speaks for us. The police formed barriers, but they didn't attack. Too many witnesses. Too many reporters documenting everything. Inside Parliament, Eliza sat in the gallery designated for noble ladies, wearing the vein pearls in a deep blue gown that made her look simultaneously regal and defiant. Catherine sat beside her, silent support in a world of whispered condemnation. The debate began. Lord Pemberton took the floor first, his arguments polished and poisonous. This bill is not about hatred, it is about preservation, about maintaining the character and integrity of our nation. We've built the greatest empire in history on the foundation of English values, English bloodlines, English strength. To dilute that foundation with foreign influences, however well-intentioned, is to risk everything our ancestors died to protect. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Some have argued that this bill is prejudiced. I argue it is prudent, that recognizing differences is not the same as condemning them. We can respect other cultures while still protecting our own, can acknowledge that mixing bloodlines inevitably weakens both. More agreement. Eliza felt her hands clench. The recent marriage of the Duke of Ashford has been held up as an example of progressive thinking. I call it what it is, a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the best of us can be deceived by charm and circumstance into forgetting our duty to our heritage. Point of order! Alaric's voice cut through the chamber like a whip. He stood in his seat among the other lords, every inch the Duke. I request the right to address this body on a matter of personal privilege. The speaker looked uncertain. Your Grace, that's highly irregular during debate. No more irregular than allowing Lord Pemberton to slander my wife while claiming objectivity. Alaric's voice carried steel. I have the right to respond to direct attacks on my family. I invoke that right now. Whispers erupted. The speaker consulted with advisors, clearly uncomfortable. Finally, you may speak, Your Grace. Briefly. Alaric descended to the floor. In the gallery, Eliza held her breath. My lords, you've heard Pemberton paint a picture of my marriage as evidence of corrupted judgment. Allow me to offer an alternative perspective. He turned to address the full chamber. My wife is the daughter of a merchant who helped build this city's prosperity. She's a writer whose words have inspired thousands to think critically about justice and equity. She's survived prejudice, loss, and systematic attempts to erase her existence, and she's done it with more grace and strength than anyone in this room. Your Grace, we're not debating your wife's character, aren't you? This entire bill is predicated on the idea that her heritage makes her lesser, that her blood somehow taints mine, weakens our family, threatens our nation. Alaric's voice rose. I'm here to tell you that's not just wrong, it's absurd. My wife makes me stronger. Our marriage makes our family stronger. And if you pass this bill, you're not protecting England. You're betraying the very principles of fairness and merit that made us great. The chamber erupted in argument. Some lords shouting support, others demanding Alaric be censured for such inflammatory language. In the chaos, Eliza stood. Every eye turned to her. Women didn't speak in Parliament, didn't even stand in the gallery unless recognized. But she stood anyway, and the sheer audacity of it created a momentary silence. I request permission to address this body, she said, her voice carrying. The speaker looked apoplectic. Madam, that is absolutely not permitted. Then change the rules. She stepped forward to the gallery railing. Or are you so afraid of what I might say that you'd rather silence me than allow me the same rights you give the men debating my very existence? This is outrageous. What's outrageous is passing laws about people without letting them defend themselves. She gestured to the windows, where the roar of the demonstration outside could be heard even through thick glass. 5,000 people are standing in the cold because they're terrified of what you might decide about their futures. The least you can do is hear from one of them. Pemberton rose, furious. The Duchess has no standing here. The Duchess has every standing. I'm the woman you're trying to legislate out of power, the threat you're so afraid of. So let me speak. Let me tell you exactly what you're fighting against. The speaker looked to the Prime Minister, who sat with an expression of pained calculation. Finally, the PM nodded. A tiny gesture, but enough. You may speak, the speaker said, clearly hating every word. Briefly. Guards appeared to escort her to the floor. Catherine grabbed her hand as she passed, squeezing once. Permission or prayer, Eliza couldn't tell. She descended the stairs to the chamber floor, every step an act of defiance. When she reached the speaker's position, where no woman had ever stood, she took a moment to look around at the faces watching her. Some hostile, some curious, most uncomfortable with this breach of tradition. My lords, she began. I am Eliza Vane, Duchess of Ashford. I am the daughter of David Chen, a Chinese merchant who helped build this city's textile trade. I am the adopted daughter of Marcus Rowan, an English businessman who loved me as his own. I am both. I am neither. I am simply myself. We know your history, Pemberton snapped. Do you? Because the bill you're debating suggests you see only my heritage, not my humanity. You see threat where there is only difference, weakness where there is actually strength. The bill is about preservation. The bill is about fear. She turned to address the chamber fully. Fear that the world is changing, that the old certainties don't hold, that people who don't look like you, sound like you, or share your ancestors might still have value, might still deserve rights, might still be English. You're not English by blood. Neither are you, her voice rang out. Your precious English bloodlines are a fantasy. This island has been invaded, settled, and mixed for thousands of years. Romans, Saxons, Vikings, Normans, all foreign blood that became English through time and proximity. The only difference between me and you is that my mixture happened more recently, is more visible, is easier to condemn. Murmurs now, uncertain, she pressed forward. But here's what terrifies you most. I'm not asking for your approval. I'm not begging for acceptance. I'm standing here as the Duchess, as a peer's wife, as someone who's already breached your walls. And you can't legislate that away without admitting that your entire system of merit and worth is arbitrary. That bloodline means nothing except what you decide it means. This is pure sophistry. This is pure truth. And you hate it because it exposes the lie you've built your power on. She looked directly at Pemberton. You want to pass this bill to punish me, to make an example, to show what happens when someone like me dares to reach above her station. But you're too late. I'm already here, and there are thousands more like me, waiting, watching, learning that the barriers you've built aren't as solid as you claimed. Outside, the demonstration's roar intensified. Someone had clearly reported what was happening inside. The sound was deafening, impossible to ignore. The people outside this building are English, Eliza continued, by birth, by work, by the taxes they pay and the society they build. You can pass your bill. You can try to strip their property, their rights, their dignity. But you can't erase them. And you can't stop what they represent, change, evolution, the future coming, whether you accept it or not. We will not be threatened. I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. She turned to address the full chamber. You have a choice today. Vote for this bill, align yourselves with prejudice and fear, and face the consequences when history judges you. Or vote against it, acknowledge that worth comes from character, not ancestry, and help build something better. And if we choose the former, the Prime Minister spoke for the first time, then we fight, not with violence, but with persistence. We use every legal tool, every public platform, every connection we have to dismantle your legislation piece by piece. And we never stop, because we have nothing to lose and everything to gain. You have much to lose, Your Grace, your position, your status. My position is secure because my husband chose me knowing exactly who I am. My status is irrelevant compared to the principle at stake. She looked at Alaric, found him watching her with open pride. I don't need your acceptance, but England needs your wisdom. It needs you to choose justice over comfort, progress over tradition for its own sake. She stepped back from the speaker's position. That's all I came to say. The rest is up to you. The chamber was silent. Then one lord stood, a young man Eliza recognized from their lobbying efforts. I move to table the Heritage Preservation Act pending further review. Another stood. I second the motion. The speaker looked flustered. We're in the middle of debate. I call for an immediate vote on the motion to table, Alaric said, standing, as is my right. The vote was chaos. Lords shouting, arguing, demanding procedures be followed or broken. But when order was finally restored and the votes were counted, the motion to table passed by 3 votes. 3 votes. The exact number they'd needed. The Heritage Preservation Act wouldn't die. It would return, likely in modified form. But it wasn't passing today. And the fact that it had been tabled after a duchess's unprecedented testimony sent a message no one could ignore. The rules were changing. Outside, when news reached the demonstration, the roar of celebration could be heard throughout the city. The aftermath came in waves. First, the praise. Editorials calling Eliza's testimony historic. Letters from across the country thanking her for her courage. Invitations to speak at universities and reform societies. Then the backlash. Conservative papers denouncing her as unnatural. Threats of violence from those who saw her as a traitor to English purity. Social ostracism from families who couldn't forgive the breach of tradition. And finally, the real work. Because the Heritage Preservation Act would return, and they needed to be ready. Eliza threw herself into building alliances. She worked with Margaret to organize working-class advocacy groups. She collaborated with reformist politicians to draft counter-legislation protecting citizenship rights regardless of heritage. She used her Veritas column to spotlight stories of mixed heritage families, making England stronger, not weaker. And slowly, painfully, the narrative began to shift. 6 months after the failed vote, a modified bill came before Parliament. This one was narrower, focused specifically on property ownership in strategic industries rather than blanket restrictions. It was still discriminatory, still wrong, but it was also beatable. The vote failed. Not by 3 votes this time, but by 12. 12 lords who'd decided that prejudice wasn't worth the political cost, that their grandchildren's futures mattered more than their ancestors' prejudices. That change was inevitable, so they might as well shape it rather than be crushed by it. It wasn't victory, but it was progress. The real transformation happened more quietly. The Workers' Education Society reopened, rebuilt with better security and expanded curriculum. This time, Eliza taught a weekly class on rhetoric and advocacy, showing working-class students how to use words as weapons against injustice. The classes were always packed. Catherine, surprisingly, became one of their most effective fundraisers. She hosted salons where aristocrats and intellectuals mixed with workers and reformers, creating spaces where ideas could flow across class boundaries. "I'm too old to change completely," she told Eliza during one such event. "But I'm not too old to recognize when I've been wrong, or when my son has found someone worth the scandal." Marcus Rowan, his health restored and his business thriving under Alaric's restructured cooperative model, opened a scholarship fund for children of mixed heritage. It started small, 5 students a year. Within 3 years, it was supporting 50. And Alaric, freed from the constant crisis management, began introducing legislative reforms. Property rights for married women, education funding for working-class children, immigration policy that recognized contribution over ancestry. Each bill faced fierce opposition, each one passed by narrower margins than anyone liked. But each one moved the needle slightly toward justice. 1 year after their wedding, Eliza stood in the same cathedral where they'd married, but this time as a speaker at a Reform Society gathering. The crowd was different, more diverse, more hopeful, united by belief rather than circumstance. She spoke about the year's progress, about the bills passed and the ones still fighting for, about the work remaining and the coalition building to continue it. And she spoke about choice. "A year ago, I stood in this cathedral choosing love over safety, choosing partnership over isolation, choosing to be visible rather than protected. People called me foolish, said I was destroying myself for a principle that would never matter." She paused, looking out at faces that represented the full spectrum of English society. They were wrong, not because the principle mattered more than I realized, though it did, but because I wasn't alone, because thousands of you made similar choices, to stand up, to speak out, to refuse invisibility. And together, we've proven something our opponents didn't want to acknowledge, that England's strength comes from diversity, not purity, from evolution, not stagnation, from people choosing to build something better rather than protecting something broken. Applause erupted. Eliza let it wash over her, feeling the weight of the year. The battles fought, the victories won, the ground still to cover. Alaric found her after the speech, pulling her into a quiet alcove. "You were brilliant, as always." "We were brilliant. This isn't my victory. It's ours. Ours and thousands of others." He kissed her forehead. "Speaking of which, I have news. Good or bad? Potentially both. The Prime Minister wants to appoint you to the Royal Commission on Immigration Reform. It's a new position, advisory role, but it comes with significant influence over policy." Eliza felt her heart skip. The same Prime Minister who tried to remain neutral during the Heritage Preservation Act debate? The same. Apparently your testimony convinced him that having diverse voices in policy decisions isn't just progressive, it's practical. You represent a constituency he can't ignore anymore. "It's a way to control me, to make me part of the system so I can't effectively criticize it." Probably. But it's also a way to shape policy from the inside, to make real changes rather than just writing about them. He studied her face. What do you think? Eliza considered the offer, the trap, and the opportunity it represented. A year ago, she would have refused on principle, would have seen only the compromise, the co-option, but she'd learned something in the past year. That purity of principle was a luxury, that real change required working within broken systems while fighting to transform them. I think I accept, on the condition that I continue writing Veritas, that I don't have to choose between advocacy and action. Already negotiated that term. You're free to criticize the very commission you're serving on. Then yes, let's see what damage we can do from the inside. 3 months later, Eliza stood in the Royal Commission chambers presenting her first major policy recommendation, a pathway to citizenship based on contribution rather than ancestry. It was radical. It faced enormous opposition. And when it finally passed, in modified form with compromises that made her teeth ache, it represented the first fundamental shift in English immigration law in a century. Not perfect, but progress. The night the policy was announced, Margaret hosted a celebration in the textile district. Hundreds gathered in the street where Eliza had once faced an angry mob. Now they were dancing, celebrating a victory that belonged to all of them. "Look what we built," Margaret said, gesturing at the crowd. A year ago, most of these people didn't think change was possible. Now they're planning what to fight for next. What are they planning? Labor rights, education funding, voting reform. Margaret grinned. "You've created a monster, cousin. People who've tasted power don't give it up easily." Good, they shouldn't. As the celebration continued, Eliza found herself thinking about the woman she'd been 2 years ago. The matchmaker who'd survived by making herself useful, invisible, safe, who'd built a life from scraps and compromises and careful silence. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone who'd learned that safety was an illusion, that silence was complicity, that the only way to survive in a hostile world was to transform it into one that couldn't destroy you. Alaric found her watching the celebration from the edge. Having regrets? Never. Just reflecting on how far we've come. We've barely started. He pulled her close. There's still so much to fix, so many battles to fight. Good thing we like fighting. Together, he corrected. We like fighting together. She kissed him then, there in the street where working-class people celebrated alongside aristocrats, where the barriers that had once seemed permanent were crumbling slowly but surely. It wasn't the end of prejudice, wasn't the end of struggle, but it was proof that struggle could win, that people willing to stand together, to refuse invisibility, to fight for each other, those people could change the world. 5 years later, Eliza published her first book. Not a collection of Veritas essays, though those existed too. This was something different, a memoir titled The Matchmaker's Gamble. It told her story. From her father's death and adoption, through building her career to the 6 weeks that changed everything. She wrote about love and strategy, about the 7 women she'd presented, and the impossible man who'd rejected them all, about choosing herself instead of safety. The book became a phenomenon. Working-class women saw themselves in her struggles. Aristocratic ladies found permission to question their own compromises. Young people of mixed heritage discovered a story that validated their existence. And enemies saw a manifesto they couldn't suppress because it was already everywhere. On publication day, Eliza stood in the Workers' Education Society, now a sprawling complex with multiple buildings, hundreds of students, and a mission that had expanded far beyond basic literacy and spoke to a packed auditorium. I wrote this book because I was tired of letting other people tell my story, tired of having my life summarized, analyzed, and weaponized by those who wanted to use it as either inspiration porn or cautionary tale. She looked out at faces young and old, rich and poor, every shade of English life. So I'm telling it myself, not as a perfect triumph or tragic downfall, but as what it is, messy, complicated, full of compromises and stubborn refusals to compromise. A life lived by someone trying to survive and thrive in a world that wanted her to do neither. Some of you will read this book and see yourselves. Others will read it and understand for the first time what it means to navigate society as an outsider. Both responses matter, because change doesn't just come from those being oppressed fighting for rights. It comes from those with privilege choosing to share it, to use their power to amplify voices that have been silenced. She smiled. That's what my husband did for me. What many of you are doing now for others. What I hope this book inspires more people to do. The audience erupted in applause. In the front row, Alaric sat beside Marcus, both men looking proud enough to burst. Catherine sat on Marcus's other side, her expression soft in a way it rarely showed in public. And throughout the crowd were familiar faces. Margaret and the women from the textile district. Sarah from the Independent Observer. Students Eliza had taught. Workers whose lives had been changed by the society. People who'd stood with them when standing was dangerous. People who'd helped build the future they'd envisioned in that cathedral 5 years ago. After the speech, Eliza signed books until her hand cramped. Each signature was a conversation, readers sharing how her story had touched theirs, asking advice, offering gratitude. One young woman, perhaps 16, with the mixed features that marked her as someone who'd faced the prejudices Eliza had fought, approached nervously. "Your Grace, I just wanted to say, you made me believe I could be more than what society says I am, that my heritage is strength, not shame." Eliza took her hand. "What's your name?" "Lynn. Lynn Merchant." "Lynn, you are more than what society says. You always were. The only question is whether you're brave enough to claim it." "I want to be. But it's hard when everyone is telling you to be smaller. So be bigger. Be so big they can't ignore you. And find others who are doing the same. Because you're not alone in this fight, even when it feels like you are." The girl left with tears streaming down her face, clutching her signed book like a talisman. "You're good at this," Alaric said when they finally escaped to a quiet corner. "At what?" "Giving people permission to be themselves, to fight, to believe change is possible." "I learned from the best." She leaned against him, exhausted but satisfied. From a duke who rejected 7 perfect brides because he was waiting for someone real. "I wasn't waiting, I was lost." He kissed her temple. "You found me." "We found each other." They stood together in the building they'd helped create, watching students and teachers mingle, ideas flowing freely across boundaries that had once seemed impenetrable. This was what they'd built. Not just a marriage, but a movement. Not just personal happiness, but structural change. It wasn't finished. Would never be finished. Every victory revealed new battles, new injustices to address, new people needing support. But that was the point. The work was ongoing, the fight was forever. And the only way to win was to keep showing up, keep speaking truth, keep refusing to accept that the world had to stay broken just because it had always been that way. That night, back at the manor, Eliza and Alaric sat in the library where this had all begun, the room where he'd hired her to find him a wife, where she'd agreed out of desperation, never imagining what she was actually agreeing to. "Do you ever think about those 7 women?" she asked. "The ones I presented?" "Sometimes. I hope they found happiness, found people who appreciated them for who they were, not what I needed them to be. I heard Lady Marguerite married a botanist, quite scandalous for her family." "Good for her." He pulled Eliza closer. "And the others?" "Miss Winters is teaching at Oxford. Caroline Pritchard started a women's literary society. Helena, I'm not sure about Helena." "And Vivian Blackwood?" Eliza smiled grimly. "Married Lord Pemberton's son. Apparently, they deserve each other." "Perfect match, then." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that came from 5 years of partnership, 5 years of fighting together, building together, occasionally driving each other mad but never doubting their choice. "I have something to tell you," Eliza said finally. "I'm pregnant." Alaric went very still. Then, "You're certain?" "As certain as the physician could make me." She turned to face him fully. "I know we talked about waiting, about wanting to establish the reforms first, make sure everything was stable. Eliza." He cupped her face. "I don't care about stability. I care about you, about us, about the family we're building, whether that's through policy or people. The child will face the same prejudices I did. Worse, maybe, because they'll be visible from birth as mixed heritage. And they'll have us. Have the entire network we've built. Have a world that's already changing because of what we've fought for." He kissed her, gentle and fierce. "They'll be strong, like you. Like the grandmother they'll never meet, but who gave you her courage. Like their grandfather who chose love over convention. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. They'll be a duke or duchess someday. Can you imagine? I can imagine them changing this country even more than we have, finishing the work we started, building the world we dreamed of but won't live to see completed. No pressure on the child then. None at all, he laughed. Just the weight of expectations from two parents who overthrew social norms for breakfast. That night, lying in bed with Alaric's hand resting protectively on her stomach, Eliza thought about the future, about the child who would grow up in a world she and Alaric were actively reshaping, about the battles that child would face and the ones they wouldn't have to fight because previous battles had been won. She thought about David Chen, the father she barely remembered but whose legacy she carried, about Marcus Rowan, who'd given her a chance when the world wanted to erase her, about her mother, who'd died giving her life. And she thought about Alaric, who'd rejected 7 perfect brides because perfection wasn't what he needed, who'd chosen complicated and real over easy and safe, who'd stood beside her through every storm and celebrated every victory. Together, they'd built something impossible, not just a marriage that defied convention, but a movement that was changing the very foundations of English society. The work wasn't done, would never be done, but it was happening, and that was enough. 10 years after their wedding, the Heritage Preservation Act was officially repealed, not tabled or modified, but struck from the books entirely. The vote wasn't even close. Eliza stood in the Parliament gallery, not as a spectator this time, but as the newly appointed Commissioner of Immigration and Heritage Affairs, a position that had been created specifically for her, acknowledging that the questions of citizenship and belonging required perspectives from those who'd lived them. Below, lords who'd once voted to restrict her rights now voted to expand them. Some had genuinely changed their minds. Others were bowing to political pressure from constituencies that had evolved. A few were just following the winds of change. Eliza didn't care about their motivations. She cared about results. When the final vote was tallied and the repeal passed, the gallery erupted. Working-class observers cheering alongside aristocrats, immigrants beside native-born English, all celebrating a victory that belonged to everyone who'd fought for it. Alaric found her in the chaos, pulling her into an embrace that spoke louder than words. "We did it," he said. "We started it," she corrected. "Our children will finish it." Their children, twin girls now 8 years old, with their father's sharp features and their mother's fierce eyes, already showing signs of the stubbornness that would serve them well in the world they'd inherit. Children who would grow up taking for granted rights their mother had to fight for, who would face their own battles, their own prejudices, but from a stronger position because of the ground that had been won before them. That evening, there was a celebration at the society, not just for the repeal, but for everything it represented, the culmination of a decade of work by thousands of people who'd refused to accept that society had to stay broken. Margaret spoke, now a member of Parliament herself, one of the first working-class women elected. Sarah spoke, her Independent Observer, now the most widely read progressive publication in the country. Catherine spoke, her journey from skeptic to ally a story in itself. And finally, Marcus spoke, 80 years old now, frail but clear-eyed, his voice still carrying the strength of someone who'd survived loss and rebuilt stronger. 10 years ago, my daughter married a duke. Society said it was scandal, catastrophe, the end of everything proper and good. He paused, smiling. They were right. It was the end of everything that was keeping us small, afraid, convinced that worth came from birth instead of from character. He looked at Eliza. My daughter didn't just marry well, she married truthfully, and in doing so she gave the rest of us permission to do the same, to stop performing who we thought we should be and start being who we actually are. So thank you, Eliza, for your stubbornness, your courage, your refusal to be diminished. You saved more than yourself. You saved all of us. The crowd rose in standing ovation. Through tears, Eliza saw faces she'd known for a decade and faces she'd just met. Saw the network they'd built, the movement they'd sparked, the future they were creating together. She thought about the woman who'd stood in a duke's study agreeing to find him a wife, who'd never imagined she was actually agreeing to find herself, to claim a voice she'd been taught to silence, to build a life that defied every limitation society had tried to impose. That woman had been brave without knowing it, had been strong without having a name for that strength, had survived because she didn't know how to do anything else. This woman, the Duchess, the Commissioner, the mother, the writer, was still that woman. But she was also more. She was every person who'd stood with her, every voice she'd amplified, every life she'd touched by refusing to accept that things had to stay the same. Alaric found her after the speeches, his expression soft with the kind of love that had only deepened over a decade of partnership. "Tired?" he asked. "Exhausted, exhilarated, terrified of what comes next." "Same, but we face it together. Always together." They left the celebration early, walking through streets that had once been hostile territory. Now people nodded respectfully, some calling out greetings. The Duchess and the Duke who'd changed the world by refusing to accept the one they'd inherited. At home, they checked on their sleeping daughters. Lily and Rose, named for flowers that bloomed despite harsh conditions. The girls slept peacefully, unaware of the celebration happening because of rights they'd never have to fight for the way their mother had. In their own room, Eliza and Alaric stood at the window looking out over the city lights. "Do you ever regret it?" Alaric asked quietly. "The life you could have had if you'd chosen differently? If you'd taken my mother's offer, disappeared abroad, avoided all this struggle?" Eliza thought about that other life, the one where she'd chosen safety over truth, invisibility over impact, survival over transformation. "Not for a second," she said. "That life would have been easier, quieter, safer. But it wouldn't have been mine. Not really. And this life? This life is messy and complicated and sometimes terrifying. But it's real. It's mine. It's ours." She turned to face him. "We built something impossible, Alaric. Not just a marriage, but a movement. Not just survival, but actual change. We're not done yet. No, but we've proven it's possible. That's more than most people get." He pulled her close, and they stood together in the darkness. Two people who'd gambled everything on an impossible choice and won more than they'd ever dreamed. Outside, the city slept. But underneath that sleep, things were stirring. New movements forming, new voices rising, new people discovering that the barriers that had seemed permanent were actually breakable. Because two people had proven it could be done, had shown that love and courage and stubborn refusal to accept injustice could actually change the world. The matchmaker who'd spent her life shaping other people's futures had finally claimed her own. The Duke who'd rejected 7 perfect brides had found the only one who mattered. And together, they'd built a future neither could have imagined alone. A future where heritage was honored without being used as a weapon. Where difference was celebrated instead of condemned. Where people could be fully themselves without apology or compromise. It wasn't perfect, but it was better. And better was worth fighting for, always.